One chance. That is all you are given. Fail, and the gates will close behind you forever.
A man who died from overwork woke up as an abandoned baby in a fantasy world, a world identical to the video game his dead parents created. And now, that world had 3 years before total annihilation. What would he do with a second life and the knowledge to prevent it all? Nino stood before a vast, open landscape, eyes wide with excitement. He pointed toward the sprawling terrain and told the others that this place had everything they needed: fields, workshops, even space for houses. They could build as much as they wanted. Behind him, 3 figures, 2 adults and a child, watched with quiet hope, taking in the same view. His enthusiasm was infectious as he painted a picture of a thriving community, a bright future waiting to be built. Gripping his staff, Nino made a solemn vow. He wanted to protect the people dear to him, everyone within his reach. He knew the truth. It was only a matter of time before the surface world would be destroyed. And so he committed himself fully to one goal: creating a safe haven where they could all live in peace. A breathtaking vision unfolded: a lush, bustling village with high arched buildings and an enormous tree towering at its center. Villagers moved happily through their daily routines, the whole place alive with warmth and purpose. Nino declared he would build this new village with his own hands, and he meant every word. Beside him stood a young woman, the two of them side by side against the open sky, radiating warmth and camaraderie. Nearby, another woman appeared, holding some kind of mechanical device, clearly an advanced alchemical tool. 2 small children in animal costumes played at her feet, their laughter a symbol of the peaceful future Nino was fighting for. But none of this had happened yet. Long before any of it, in a different world entirely, a story was already in motion. A young boy named Masamichi tugged at another kid's sleeve, raving about a brand new game and how incredible it was. The memory carried warmth. His father was a game developer, passionate about his craft, and his mother supported the family with a gentle, encouraging smile. Masamichi grew up cherished, surrounded by love and the magic of game creation. That warmth shattered without warning. Everything changed. A funeral. Memorial photos of both parents displayed side by side. The loss hit Masamichi like a wall. He withdrew from the world completely, his room falling into disarray as grief consumed him, dragging him into isolation. What pulled him back was the very thing his parents had poured their hearts into. The game Dragonia Chronicle became his lifeline, a living connection to the mother and father he had lost. Playing it filled the void, gave him purpose again when nothing else could. Fueled by that rediscovered drive, Masamichi threw himself into studying programming, determined to honor his parents' legacy through game development. But he pushed too hard for too long. One day, his colleagues panicked as he suddenly collapsed, years of overwork finally catching up to him. A stormy sky stretched overhead, hinting at turbulent times ahead. Masamichi's past life had ended, but everything he had lived through, the love, the loss, the obsession, would fuel what came next. What came next was a rainy night outside an orphanage. 2 women huddled by the building, staring down at something on the ground. One of them muttered about what they should do, of all the places for this to happen. The other mentioned the orphanage was already overwhelmed, barely keeping up as it was, but neither of them could bring herself to walk away. They agreed, reluctantly, to take the child in. There on the cold, wet ground, a baby cried alone in the rain, helpless, abandoned, and completely unaware that he carried the soul of a man from another world. 26 years passed. That baby had grown into a man named Nino, now living in the sacred Vilnia kingdom. He woke up groggy in his bed, groaning as morning light crept over a bustling cityscape of old-style buildings. Before he could even gather his thoughts, a woman with animal ears burst into the room, shouting at him to wake up. That was Eni, loud, relentless, and utterly unwilling to let him sleep in. Nino mumbled something about 5 more minutes, but Eni responded by yanking the blanket clean off him. He tumbled right off the bed, hitting the floor with a thud. He picked himself up, rubbing his back, and told her she could at least try waking him up like a normal person for once. Eni just grinned and reminded him he was going to be late. She had zero sympathy. Downstairs, a large beastkin man named Ori had breakfast waiting. He slammed a massive plate of food on the table and told Nino to eat up. Nino stared at the mountain of food, stunned by the sheer amount. Ori warned him that skipping meals would make him collapse, so Nino dug in, quietly accepting that this was just his life now. Enormous breakfasts, courtesy of a bear-like man who treated him like family. For a brief moment, Nino's mind drifted back to the very beginning. The rain, the crying, the moment he had been reborn into this fantastical world. That helpless baby had come a long way. Back in the present, Annie fussed over him before he left, checking if he had his magic stone and warning him to stay alert out there. Nino waved her off, insisting he wasn't a kid anymore, and headed out into the village as Annie and Ori called after him with their usual farewells. He made his way to the Royal Alchemy workshop, where he had worked for the past 10 years as a low-level handyman. The moment he stepped inside, a supervisor greeted him with an overly enthusiastic grin, calling him the treasure of the workshop, then immediately dumped a towering list of tasks on him. Nino sighed, muttering that the workload was going to kill him. Nearby, his colleague Arnaruto watched with a sly smirk, saying nothing but clearly entertained by Nino's suffering. Nino caught the look and asked what his problem was, but Arnaruto just shrugged it off, keeping whatever he was thinking to himself. Something about that smirk felt deliberate, like Arnaruto knew something Nino didn't. It didn't take long for Arnaruto to drop the act. He sidled over with that same smug grin and remarked how rough it must be to work as a lowly handyman, doing nothing but tedious little tasks, day after day. His tone was dripping with condescension, the kind that made it clear he thought himself superior. Then, as if to prove the point, Arnaruto performed a flashy transmutation right there in front of everyone, practically showing off. He asked if Nino wouldn't prefer to do something like that instead, something impressive, something that actually mattered. The other workers nearby ate it up, praising Arnaruto as the top performer in the workshop. Nino just shrugged it off. Not really, he thought. He couldn't have cared less. Arnaruto kept going, making a snide comment about the common race and how they lacked real talent. A jab aimed squarely at Nino, who was a generic human without any divine protection. But Nino didn't take the bait. He simply turned back to his own work, quietly manipulating materials in his practical, unshowy way. He was a transmutation artisan, and he didn't need to be flashy about it. The craft itself was more complex than most people realized. Alchemy in this world revolved around 6 types of magic stones, each tied to different processes: analysis, extraction, mixing, purification. Nino understood the intricacies well after a decade of hands-on work. The precision required was immense, and becoming a proficient artisan took years of careful study and practice. Most people never got there. The catch was that Nino belonged to the generic human race, which meant he had no dragon's blessing, no divine protection to boost his transmutations to higher levels. That limitation kept him locked into his role as the workshop's handyman, stuck handling material analysis and preparation while others got the glory. He knew his ceiling, and he had made peace with it, but there was a quiet determination beneath that acceptance. He told himself he didn't mind being a handyman. If it meant protecting his simple, peaceful life, he would do whatever it took. He gripped a magic stone in his hand, his gaze steady, his mind already turning toward a more pressing matter that demanded his attention. That matter found him before he was ready. The workshop chief, Barnabas, called Nino into his office in the middle of the workday. The room was well furnished, serious, not the kind of place you got summoned to for good news. Nino stepped inside feeling apprehensive, already sensing something was wrong. Barnabas didn't waste time with pleasantries. He acknowledged Nino's contributions over the past 10 years, expressed genuine gratitude for everything he had done, and then his tone shifted. There was regret in his voice as he delivered the blow. The Dragonspear Holy Knights were planning to arrest Nino for the crime of incitement. Barnabas laid it out plainly. The kingdom had caught wind of what Nino had been doing, and they were coming for him. Nino's expression tightened. He absorbed the news quietly, then let out a measured response. So it had been exposed after all. Whatever he had been working on in secret, whatever risks he had been taking, the consequences had finally arrived. Barnabas then explained what had happened. Nino had been visiting taverns, quietly spreading warnings about coming calamities, telling anyone who would listen that disaster was on the horizon, that the kingdom itself could fall. The authorities had taken notice, and someone had reported him. But Barnabas wasn't angry. He told Nino that despite not fully understanding his reasons, he believed in him. He trusted that Nino must have had no choice. Nino apologized for the trouble he had caused, knowing his actions had put Barnabas in a difficult position. Rather than leaving Nino to face arrest, Barnabas pulled out a map and spread it across his desk. He pointed to a location near the southwestern border, a pioneer village that was actively looking for a transmutation artisan. He suggested this as Nino's way out, a chance to start fresh and gain real independence far from the capital. Nino stared at the map, processing the offer. The location stirred something in him, a flicker of recognition from memories he kept buried. He hesitated for a moment, studying the details, but the decision was already forming. He told Barnabas he didn't even know how to express his gratitude, and with sincere emotion, he accepted the opportunity. It was an honor, he said, and he meant it. Barnabas, the horn on his forehead catching the lamplight, simply nodded. A quiet farewell between two men who respected each other deeply. Afterward, Nino stood alone surveying the vast cityscape of the capital, the sprawling rooftops, the crowded streets, the life buzzing in every direction. This had been his home since reincarnation. 26 years of hardship, of carving out a place for himself in a world that wasn't originally his. And now he was leaving it behind, carrying knowledge that weighed heavier than anything else. This city, this kingdom, all of it. It would be destroyed in 3 years. He was the only one who knew. As if on cue, children in the streets below started pointing at the sky, shouting in alarm. A massive crack had appeared across the surface of the moon, splitting it like a wound. The sight sent a wave of panic through the populace. Rumors exploded overnight, whispers of catastrophe, of surging monster activity, of the world coming apart at the seams. The kingdom was thrown into turmoil, as fear spread faster than any official could contain it. But Queen Veltrude moved quickly. After consulting her scholars, she made a public declaration. The crack in the moon was not a sign of doom, but a mark of good fortune, a celestial blessing coinciding with the kingdom's 500th anniversary. The people reacted with a confused mix of shock and relief, wanting desperately to believe her words. Nino knew better. He recognized the event immediately. The moon's smile. That was what it was called in the game from his past life, Dragonia Chronicle. It was the eye of a world-destroying dragon, slowly awakening. The clock had started. He stood among the crowds, staring up at that fractured sky, and the full weight of his situation settled over him. This world wasn't just similar to the game. It was identical. Everything he remembered, every event, every catastrophe, it was all real now, and it was all coming. The reason Nino recognized it so clearly went back to the game itself. Dragonia Chronicle II was a crafting-based RPG where the player took on the role of a transmutation artisan, exploring the world, completing quests, and building things from scratch. It was massive in scope, the kind of game where you could lose hundreds of hours discovering its systems and secrets. One memorable scene even featured a couple holding twin babies, and the game was packed with intricately designed crafted items that rewarded curiosity at every turn. For Nino, it was more than just a game. His father had been the director, the visionary behind the entire project. His mother had been the character designer, breathing life into every face and figure that populated that world. After losing them both in the accident, Dragonia Chronicle became Nino's only connection to them. Every line of dialogue, every character expression, it all carried the echo of his parents. Playing through it felt like hearing their voices one more time. So when the moon's smile appeared in this world, Nino's reaction wasn't just recognition, it was horror. His eyes went wide, his expression crumbling as the pieces clicked into place. That wasn't some harmless celestial event. It was the dragon of destruction beginning to open its eye, the first step toward the end of everything. He had played through that sequence before. He knew exactly where it led. The crack in the moon would widen, the monsters would surge, and if nothing changed, the world would barrel straight into the bad ending route. Total destruction. Cities reduced to rubble, citizens in disarray, a ferocious dragon laying waste to everything that remained. That was why Nino had been sneaking into taverns. He would throw on a cloak, disguise his voice, and spread rumors about the coming disasters, planting seeds of urgency so that when the situation worsened, people would already be primed to act. It was a calculated strategy. If enough people believed something catastrophic was coming, they might actually prepare for it. A self-fulfilling prophecy turned into a survival tool, but it hadn't worked the way he hoped. Somewhere in the kingdom's halls of power, a king surrounded by knights wrestled with the failure of their planned interventions, wondering aloud where it all went wrong. Scholars debated in libraries, questioning why their measures had fallen short. The system wasn't built to handle warnings from a nobody alchemist whispering in taverns. And then there was Naruto. That ogre-human hybrid strolled up to Nino with his usual air of superiority, calling him Mr. Ordinary with a mocking grin. He launched into some condescending remark about how boring Nino's task descriptions were, how dull his handyman work must be. Nino tensed and told him to wait. But Naruto kept talking, and then, in a moment of quiet realization, Nino connected the dots. Naruto was the one who had reported him. He was the The smug looks, the sly comments. It all made sense now. Naruto practically confirmed it with a snide remark about tavern rumors, barely even trying to hide his satisfaction. To twist the knife further, Naruto offered to help Nino with his transmutation work, his tone oozing false generosity. He clearly expected Nino to grovel, maybe even call him Naruto-sama and beg for assistance, but Nino saw right through it. The offer was disingenuous, just another power play from a petty man with a grudge. Nino's frustration boiled beneath the surface as he stared at his colleague, the weight of what was at stake pressing down on him. The world was 3 years from annihilation, and this man was playing office politics. The short-sightedness of it was almost suffocating. Nino sat at his desk, holding the transfer letter from Barnabas, turning it over in his hands. 2 coworkers watched him from across the room. The letter had brought a strange kind of hope, a way out, a new beginning. He didn't want to cause any more commotion before leaving, but something nagged at him. With a quiet resolve, he decided this was the perfect time to test something he had been holding back. Naruto appeared again, leaning in with that mischievous smile, taunting Nino about his pace. At this rate, he said, Nino would never finish his workload before the day was out. Maybe he should pick up the speed a little. Nino didn't respond to the provocation. Instead, he began a series of rapid hand gestures over his workstation, movements so precise and unusual that Naruto's smirk faltered. He couldn't follow what Nino was doing. That was when it clicked for Nino. The absurd mountain of tasks dumped on him that morning. It hadn't been random. Naruto had arranged it, piling on extra work to humiliate him on what was supposed to be his last day. But knowing that only freed Nino from any reason to hold back, he unleashed the full extent of his abilities, manipulating materials with blinding speed and pinpoint control. Magic stones lit up in sequence as transmutation after transmutation completed in seconds. Naruto stood frozen, mouth open, watching a man he had dismissed as ordinary tear through complex alchemical processes like they were nothing. He stammered, unable to reconcile what he was seeing with the lowly handyman he had mocked for years. The display reached its peak. A gust of magical wind erupted from Nino's workstation, sending papers flying and knocking Naruto off his feet. He cried out in surprise as he crashed backward into a shelf of finished products, scattering them across the floor. Nino finished the last transmutation, let out a calm breath, and surveyed the aftermath. Every single task was done. He sighed with quiet satisfaction, the room around him in total disarray. A supervisor rushed in, took one look at the mess, and immediately rounded on Naruto, who was still on the floor surrounded by ruined products. The supervisor accused him of destroying the workshop's inventory and ordered him to stay late to redo everything he had knocked over. Naruto sputtered, trying to explain, but no one was listening. Nino simply excused himself with a relaxed wave, walking out of the Royal Alchemy workshop for the last time. He felt the whole thing had been almost anticlimactic. 10 years of work, and his exit came down to embarrassing a bully and slipping out the door. Outside, a group of children spotted him immediately and ran over, calling his name with bright, eager voices. He smiled and greeted them warmly. Despite everything, he mattered to the people in this community, even the smallest ones. He arrived home earlier than expected. Eni and Ori looked up with concern the moment he walked through the door. Nino sat down with them and explained everything: the transfer order, the rural post near the southwestern border. He was leaving the capital. The 2 beastkin took the news with quiet strength, assuring him they would manage on their own. They had always known this day might come. But then Eni's expression shifted. She mentioned something that had been bothering her. Someone unusual had been watching the boarding house earlier, a knight-like figure lurking just out of sight. The Dragonspear Holy Knights were already closing in. Nino's jaw tightened. He couldn't leave through the front gate, not anymore. He told Eni and Ori to meet him at the underground storage beneath the building. He had a plan to slip out through the sewers before the knights made their move. The 2 of them nodded without hesitation, trusting him completely. Whatever Nino needed, they were with him. The tension in the room was thick, but so was the bond between the 3 of them. A family forged not by blood, but by 26 years of looking out for each other. Nino finished packing his backpack in the underground storage, cinching the straps tight and taking one last look around. That should do it, he thought. Everything he needed was on his back. Everything he was leaving behind was upstairs. Before heading out, the 3 of them sat together one final time. Eni and Ori had prepared a small meal, nothing fancy, just food and drinks shared between people who had spent a lifetime under the same roof. They ate together in the dim light of the storage room, the mood bittersweet. Nobody rushed. For a few quiet minutes, it was just the 3 of them, the way it had always been. Then, Ori stood up and walked to a section of the floor. He gripped the edge of a wooden panel and lifted it, revealing a hidden passage beneath the boards. Nino stared. He had lived in this house for over 2 decades and never knew it existed. Ori let out a short laugh and told him he had no idea about this, did he? The passage led down into the city's sewer network, a direct route out of the capital, completely hidden from the knights watching the streets above. Nino's expression sharpened with determination. This was his way out. Ori gave him an approving nod, telling him it was exactly what he expected from someone like Nino, always thinking ahead, always finding a path forward. That was when Annie broke. She threw her arms around Nino and held on tight, tears streaming down her face. She apologized for not being able to do more, for not being able to protect him, for all of it. Nino froze for a moment, caught off guard by the force of her emotion. Then he said her name softly. He called her an idiot for thinking she needed to apologize. She had given him everything, a home, a family, a reason to keep going when this world had thrown him away as a baby in the rain. He told her to hold her head high. She had nothing to be sorry for. Ori stepped forward with a packed bag and pressed it into Nino's hands, telling him he hadn't eaten lunch yet, and there was no way he was leaving on an empty stomach. The bag was heavy with provisions, more than enough for the journey ahead. Nino accepted it quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as he thanked them. Ori pulled him into a firm embrace, the kind that said everything words couldn't. Then they let him go. Nino climbed into a waiting cart outside the city, Hans's carriage, already prepared for the long ride southwest. As the wheels began to turn and the capital shrank behind him, Nino reached into the bag Ori had given him. Underneath the food, his fingers found a small basket. He opened it and went still. Inside was money, nearly a month's worth of their earnings. Annie and Ori had scraped together everything they could and hidden it at the bottom of his provisions without saying a word. Nino's throat tightened. "Damn it," he muttered, his voice cracking under the weight of it. Those two had given him the last of what they had. He pulled out one of Ori's sandwiches and took a bite. The tears came before he could stop them. It was ridiculously good. Every flavor hit him like a memory. Mornings at the breakfast table, Ori's enormous plates, Annie shouting at him to wake up. He chewed through the tears and swallowed hard. Nothing was over yet. He still had work to do. As the carriage rolled on, Nino studied the map Barnabas had given him. The pioneer village near the southwestern border. It wasn't just any village. He recognized the location from Drakuro 2. It was the starting village, the very place where the game's story began. And beneath it, buried deep underground, lay the reason Nino had accepted this transfer without a second thought. The Dragon Jade Palace. 100 floors of the most brutal, unforgiving dungeon in Dragonia Chronicle Decale. The game's toughest hidden dungeon, a place most players never even found. Ancient ruins stretched into the earth, filled with mystical artifacts and dangers beyond imagination. Nino's mind raced through everything he remembered about it. The resources inside that dungeon, the items, the power waiting to be claimed. It was all real now, and it was exactly what he needed. This was the final hope, not just for him, not just for the village, for the entire world. 3 years until the Dragon of Destruction fully awakened. 3 years to build something strong enough to survive what was coming. And it all started here, in a forgotten village, above a dungeon nobody knew existed. Nino gripped the edge of the carriage, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In his mind, the faces of everyone he cared about flashed by. Annie and Ori smiling at the doorway, the children waving goodbye, Barnabas nodding from behind his desk. He made a silent vow, the kind that burned itself into bone. He would save them all. The journey southwest stretched across a vast, rocky landscape, miles of barren terrain with nothing but dust and sky in every direction. The carriage rattled along a lonely road, the isolation of the frontier pressing in from all sides. Nino sat in the back, gazing out over the rugged scenery, his mind turning over everything that lay ahead. Up front, Hans was in good spirits. The moment he had learned Nino was a transmutation artisan, his whole demeanor had lit up. He welcomed Nino warmly, chatting away as they rode, clearly excited to have someone with real skills heading to the village. Nino studied the merchant carefully. Hans was a character from Drakuro II, one of the familiar faces Nino had memorized from his previous life. Recognizing people from the game was one of the few advantages he had in this world, and he leaned on it heavily to navigate situations he couldn't predict otherwise. But Hans wasn't the only passenger. A cloaked figure sat quietly in the carriage, hood drawn low, saying nothing. Nino's guard went up immediately. His thoughts raced. Could she be from the Dragonspear Holy Knights? Had they sent someone after him already? He watched her from the corner of his eye, running through possibilities. But there were no signs of pursuit, no armed riders on the horizon. He forced himself to relax. If the knights had tracked him this far, they wouldn't have sent a single cloaked woman on a merchant's carriage. He was being paranoid. Hans, oblivious to any tension, kept up his cheerful conversation. Nino let the merchant's easygoing nature settle his nerves and turned his attention inward. A familiar interface flickered into view, his command menu, visible only to him. It hovered at the edge of his vision like a translucent overlay: alchemy, inventory, allies, map. Game-like elements layered directly onto reality. Nobody else could see it, and Nino had long since stopped questioning why he had it. It was simply part of who he was in this world. His gaze drifted to the cracked moon hanging in the sky, and the weight of his mission pressed down again. That fracture, the dragon of destruction's eye, slowly prying open. Every time he saw it, something tightened in his chest. He thought of the elaborate dragon imagery from the game, the scales of balance tipping toward ruin. The world's condition was deteriorating, and he was one of the only people who understood why. He reviewed his capabilities through the menu. Recipe transmutation allowed him to convert materials at rapid speed, far faster than conventional alchemy. The map function displayed explored and unexplored areas, giving him a tactical edge wherever he went. The party tab was empty for now, since he was traveling alone, but that would change soon enough. Then, everything shifted in an instant. The cloaked woman suddenly doubled over, clutching something beneath her robes. Nino's eyes went wide. It looked like she was about to give birth. He snapped into action without thinking, calling out that they needed hot water and clean cloths. He could use his heating ability to warm the water and purify the fabric. His mind was already running through what he had available, adapting to the emergency on the spot. Hans yanked the reins and brought the carriage to a halt. The woman lowered her hood, revealing herself for the first time. She thanked them politely and asked if Nino could lend her a hand with what was coming. Nino agreed without hesitation, ready to do whatever was needed. Whatever this situation turned out to be, he wasn't the kind of person to stand by while someone needed help. Nino wiped the sweat from his face and studied the woman more closely. Something felt off. She was calm, too calm for someone supposedly in the middle of a medical emergency. There was no panic in her expression, no tension in her body. She sat gracefully, her long hair falling around her shoulders, a serene smile on her face as if nothing were wrong at all. Then she shifted, and Nino saw it, a slender, demonic tail curling behind her, along with pointed ears and rich, chocolate-colored skin. She was from the demon race. The realization hit him all at once, and what she had been clutching beneath her cloak wasn't a pregnant belly. It was a massive, ornately patterned egg, cradled in her lap like something precious. Hans leaned over from the driver's seat, eyes bulging. He blurted out that the egg was enormous and had to be a monster egg. Nino's stomach dropped. Monster eggs were no small matter. A flashback tore through his mind. Images of fearsome beasts tearing through people without mercy, creatures that spawned in magic-infused zones and attacked anyone radiating magical energy. If whatever was inside that egg hatched wrong, it could be catastrophic. The woman, Paula, as Nino would come to know her, made a calm request. She needed him to pour his magic into the egg. Her own reserves weren't enough to complete the hatching process safely. Nino hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. This wasn't like his usual transmutations. It was something rawer, more instinctive, but he recalled a piece of knowledge from the game. If human magic filled the shell during hatching, it could reduce the creature's natural aggression. That was his window. He placed both hands on the egg and focused. The sensation was intense, nothing like channeling magic through stones or tools. He poured everything he had into it, determined not to fail. Then, something extraordinary happened. Waves of magic erupted from his palms in a cascade of colors. Not one or two, but a full rainbow of shimmering light that washed over the egg and lit up the entire carriage. Paula's serene expression cracked into genuine astonishment. She stared at the swirling colors, marveling at how many there were, at the sheer volume of magic flowing from a single human. It shouldn't have been possible. Humans were supposed to have limited magical output, yet Nino was producing more than she could. Nino barely registered her reaction. He was deep in concentration, feeling himself pulled into the process, wondering what he was even becoming as the magic surged through him. The egg trembled, cracks spidered across its surface, spreading faster and faster until it burst open. Two small creatures exploded out of the shell, tumbling into the open air. Nino jerked back in shock. They were tiny, wild-eyed, and very much alive. One was covered in black fur with streaks of purple, sporting beast-like ears, Yoru. The other had black feathers and small wing-like appendages, Ku, twins. Two of them had hatched from a single egg. Nino's first instinct was pure panic. He scrambled backward, hands up, telling them not to come any closer, begging them not to eat him. But the two little creatures just blinked at him with wide, curious eyes and then bounded forward playfully, climbing over his arms and nuzzling against him like he was their favorite person in the world. They had bonded with him. His magic had been the one filling the shell, and now they recognized him as their master. Paula let out a soft laugh, watching the scene unfold. She remarked that no wonder the egg had felt so heavy. There had been 2 of them in there the whole time. Hans stood in the background, mouth hanging open, still trying to process the chaos that had just unfolded in his carriage. Paula glanced at Nino, who was still fixated on the fact that twins had hatched, and told him with a playful grin that maybe he should worry about something a little more significant than the twin part. The little ones were already crawling all over him, and whether he was ready or not, he had just become a father of 2. The commotion settled, but the questions didn't. Nino stared at the 2 little creatures now perched on his shoulders and wondered aloud whether monsters could even talk. They were making sounds, responding to his movements, behaving almost like they understood him. Hans scratched his head and pointed out that they had hatched from an egg, so they clearly weren't human, but they didn't look like angels or demons either. After a tense moment of uncertainty, it became clear the twins showed no aggression whatsoever. Everyone exhaled. Whatever Yoru and Ku were, they weren't dangerous, at least not to their group. Still, something nagged at Nino. He turned to Paula and asked why the twins kept gravitating toward him instead of her. She was the one who had been carrying the egg, the one who had intended to be their master. Paula explained it simply. Nino's magic power had surpassed her own during the hatching. When his rainbow-colored waves flooded the egg, the creatures inside locked onto him as their primary bond. Mastership went to whoever provided the most magic at the moment of hatching, and Nino had blown past her without even trying. He blinked, stunned. He hadn't known it worked that way. Paula waved off his concern with a gentle smile, reminding him that she had been the one to ask for his help in the first place. There was no resentment, just quiet trust and an understanding that things had played out as they were meant to. Then her expression shifted to something more intense. She told Nino that the wave of magic he had produced was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. The sheer volume, the colors, the density of it. She asked if he was some kind of gifted mage, or perhaps a remarkably talented transmutation artisan. Nino shook his head and denied having any exceptional abilities. He was just a handyman, nothing special. Paula didn't seem convinced, but she let it go and instead asked if he was also headed to the royal capital. There was a pause, then an awkward realization. The royal capital was in the opposite direction from where this carriage was heading. Paula had been traveling the wrong way the entire time. She stiffened, the composure she had maintained through the entire egg hatching finally cracking into embarrassment. Nino and Hans exchanged a glance. She was directionally challenged, completely, hopelessly lost, but Paula recovered quickly, her embarrassment melting into something warmer. She reflected on the situation and said that even though she had taken the wrong path, it had led her to meet Nino. She looked at him with an expression that carried real weight, calling him my dear, and declaring that their encounter must have been fate. The word hung in the air between them. Nino froze. He tried to process what she had just said. Fate, meeting, my dear, and his brain stalled. But underneath the flustered surface, something deeper was clicking into place. A memory surged forward from his previous life, from hundreds of hours spent playing Drakuro 2. He knew this woman, not just as a fellow traveler, not just as the owner of a monster egg. Paula was a heroine candidate, one of the key characters in Dragonia Chronicle 2, a figure central to the game's story. She was supposed to be in this world. She was supposed to matter. The recognition hit him like a thunderbolt. Before he could stop himself, he said her name out loud. Paula! Just like that, with the certainty of someone who had known it all along. Paula's eyes widened. Her playful confidence faltered for the first time. She stared at him, genuinely caught off guard, and asked how he knew her name. She had never introduced herself. Her surprise was real, tinged with curiosity, with a flicker of something that suggested this moment meant more than either of them fully understood yet. Nino stood there, the twins clinging to his arms, a demon woman studying his face for answers he couldn't give, and the weight of a game world made flesh pressing down on everything. The carriage rolled on toward the starting village, and the party that would fight to save the world had just begun to take shape. Paula stood with her tail curled into the shape of a heart behind her, the bright sky framing her as she looked back at Nino over her shoulder. The question still hung between them. How did he know her name? Her surprise was genuine, her curiosity sharp. Nino's mind raced. He had slipped up badly, blurting out her name without thinking. He scrambled for a cover story and landed on the most absurd thing he could think of. He told her it was a natural ability he had, that he could just sense people's names. It was ridiculous. There was no way anyone would believe that, but Paula's face lit up. She accepted it immediately, even enthusiastically, as though it were the most fascinating thing she had heard all day. Nino stood there, stunned, wondering if she had genuinely bought that explanation. He decided not to push his luck and moved on. As he processed the moment, the two little creatures, Yoru and Ku, bounded over to him again, full of energy. He glanced at them and recalled how their names had come about. In the chaos of the hatching, he had shouted at them not to come close and not to eat him. Somehow, those panicked words had stuck. Yoru from "don't come close," Ku from "don't eat." They had latched onto those sounds as their names, and now they wore them proudly. Paula noticed the twins responding to the names and remarked that they had received good names, as if naming carried real significance in this world. Yoru and Ku perked up at the praise, clearly delighted. Nino was still wrapping his head around the fact that these two had somehow become permanent members of his party without him ever agreeing to it. The carriage continued rolling across the vast landscape, the frontier stretching endlessly around them. Nino turned the conversation to Paula and asked what her original plans in the royal capital had been. She explained that her uncle lived there and she had intended to visit him. That was all. A simple family trip that had gone spectacularly wrong because she had boarded a carriage heading in the exact opposite direction. She mentioned the monster egg casually, as though deciding to travel across the continent with a potentially dangerous creature in her lap had been nothing more than a bold impulse, a desire for adventure. Nino could only stare. The egg had already hatched into two familiars that were now climbing his legs, and Paula talked about it like it had been a fun detour. Then the conversation took a quieter turn. Nino, caught up in the moment, let something slip. He said he wanted to save the world. The words left his mouth before he could stop them, and he immediately corrected himself, stammering that he meant he wanted to save his family. His face flushed with embarrassment at the grandiosity of what he had almost admitted. Paula watched him carefully, a knowing look in her eyes. She didn't press him on it, but something in her expression suggested she believed the first version more than the correction. She told him, almost cryptically, that she felt she had already fulfilled her reason for traveling. The original purpose, visiting her uncle, no longer seemed to matter. Meeting Nino had changed something for her. He wasn't sure what to make of that, but he recognized the value of what was right in front of him. Paula was a monster tamer, a heroine candidate from Drakuro 2, powerful and resourceful. Having her as an ally wasn't just convenient, it could change everything about his chances of survival. When she offered to join him on his journey, Nino didn't need long to think about it. Her skills, her combat experience, her ability to command creatures, all of it would be invaluable for what lay ahead. He accepted, and with that simple agreement, the party grew. Nino, Paula, Yoru, and Ku, 4 travelers on a merchant's carriage, rolling toward a forgotten village at the edge of the kingdom, carrying the weight of a future none of them could fully see yet. Nino held his hand out to Paula with a trusting smile and told her he would be counting on her. Paula took it without hesitation, gripping firmly, and said she looked forward to working with him too. The handshake sealed it. They were partners now, for real. Not long after, Hans called out from the front of the carriage. The village had come into view. Windmills dotted the distant hillside, their blades turning lazily against the sky. Everyone leaned forward to look, and a quiet excitement rippled through the group. They had finally arrived. Nino stared at the village and felt something unexpected tighten in his chest. The starting village. He had spent countless hours here in Drakuro 2, running through its streets, talking to its residents, completing its earliest quests. Seeing it in person, real buildings, real dirt roads, real windmills, stirred a deep nostalgia that caught him off guard. Paula noticed his expression and asked if he knew this place. He admitted it felt familiar, leaving it at that. As they rolled into the village proper, faces began to emerge. A broad-shouldered beastman at a forge looked up and called out to them. Hamo, the blacksmith, already promising to forge something better than whatever Nino was carrying. A woman behind a bar counter slid drinks across the wood with practiced ease. An old man with a flushed face and a loud voice held court at a table, gossiping about anything and everything. That was Yugen, the village elder who loved his drink more than most things. And running the tavern itself was Yute, Hans's sister, sharp-eyed and warm, keeping the whole place together. Nino recognized every single one of them, characters from the game, now flesh and blood, living their lives in a village at the edge of the kingdom. He caught himself almost saying something he shouldn't have, a detail he couldn't possibly know yet, and quickly covered it up, muttering that it was supposed to be a secret. The villagers' warmth washed over him, and beneath the nostalgia, a quiet hope surfaced. He wanted to see them all again. He wanted these bonds to last. But that warmth faded fast once he looked closer. The village was in bad shape. The people walking the streets looked weary, their faces lined with exhaustion and worry. A woman clutched an empty bottle with a hollow expression. The fields were barren. The air itself felt dry and strained, like the land was slowly dying. Then they reached the riverbed, or what used to be a riverbed. The water was gone, completely dried up. Nothing but cracked earth where a river should have been. Paula spotted it first and called out, pointing at the severity of it. A villager approached and addressed Nino respectfully, recognizing him as the transmutation artisan they had been waiting for. Inside the village hall, Dirk, the village chief, an Oni human with a horn on his forehead, laid out the full picture. The drought had struck suddenly at the beginning of the year. The river that sustained the entire village had vanished. Crops were failing, and the people were struggling to survive. The urgency in his voice made it clear they were running out of time. Nino listened, and a cold realization settled over him. This wasn't just a local crisis. He had seen this exact sequence play out in Drakuro too. The dried river, the failing village, the slow collapse. It was all part of the bad ending route. If nothing changed, this village would be one of the first dominoes to fall before the world followed. He felt the weight of it press into his shoulders and told himself he had to do something. This was where it started. This was where he could change the outcome. He threw himself into studying the problem, poring over maps and data late into the night. At some point, exhaustion finally won. When he opened his eyes, morning light was streaming in, and his head was resting in Paula's lap. She looked down at him with a teasing smile and asked if he was finally awake. Nino bolted upright, face burning, stammering an apology for falling asleep on her. Paula told him not to worry about it. He had looked completely drained, and she hadn't wanted to disturb him. Breakfast arrived courtesy of Ute, who introduced herself properly and mentioned she was Hans's sister. The food was simple, reflecting the village's scarcity. As Nino ate, the gravity of the situation sank deeper. Things were worse than he had initially thought. There were villagers he hadn't even met yet, all of them depending on someone finding a solution before the drought consumed everything they had left. Yugen swung by their table, drink in hand despite the early hour, cracking jokes and telling stories with the easy confidence of a man who had lived through enough to stop worrying. The banner lightened the mood, and for a few minutes, the tavern felt almost normal. But underneath the laughter, the crisis was still there. The empty riverbed, the barren fields, the slow starvation of a village that had no idea it was caught in the opening chapter of the world's destruction. The welcome didn't stop at breakfast. Haimo showed up carrying a plate of salted pork, telling Nino to try it with the casual gruffness of a man who showed affection through food rather than words. When Nino got too excited at seeing him, Haimo waved him off, telling him there was no need to get so worked up, that it was always like this with him. Right behind him came Yugen, hauling a pot of stewed beans and proudly explaining that they came from his own farm. Nino was taken aback by the generosity. Despite everything the village was going through, these people were sharing what little they had. Someone apologized for the commotion, but there was nothing to apologize for. Yude explained what was happening. The villagers were excited because a transmutation artisan had never visited their village before. Nino's arrival was the first real spark of hope they had felt in months, and everyone wanted to be part of the moment. She encouraged him to just let them have this. Nino looked around and told the gathering crowd to relax, to enjoy themselves. Old and young alike poured into the tavern, the atmosphere swelling into something almost festive. Drinks were passed around, conversations overlapped, and for a little while, the drought and the barren fields didn't exist. Nino smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that was hard to describe. This welcoming spirit, it was exactly the same as in the game. The starting village had always been like this, a place that pulled you in and made you want to stay. But the smile didn't last. His thoughts drifted to what he knew was coming. If things stayed the way they were, the village would decline, the drought would worsen, the people would scatter, and everything that made this place feel alive would crumble. The warmth he felt right now would become a memory. He needed to change the status quo. There was a place, a specific location, that held the key to turning everything around. He knew it existed because he had found it in Drakuro Tentu, but the exact location was fuzzy. He sat quietly, trying to pull the details from years-old memories of a game he had played in another life, and the frustration of not quite remembering gnawed at him. Paula mentioned she wanted to talk to more of the villagers, to learn about the community and connect with the people they were now living among. The suggestion triggered something in Nino's mind. In the game, the dungeon's location wasn't something you stumbled across on your own. It was revealed through a specific interaction. You had to talk to the village chief. That was the trigger. That was the event flag. The realization hit him like a bolt. Talk to the village chief. That was it. He grabbed Paula and they rushed to Dirk's dwelling, bursting through the door with an urgency that startled the old chief. Nino told him directly that he needed to ask something vital to the village's survival. Dirk listened as Nino pressed him about what lay beneath the dried riverbed, about whether there was a path leading underground. The chief's expression shifted. There was a place, he confirmed, a passage, hidden and overgrown, near where the river used to flow, the way to the dungeon. They found it that same day. Near the cracked, empty riverbed, half swallowed by gnarled roots and thick undergrowth, a dark entrance yawned open in the earth. The air around it was heavy, carrying something ancient and unsettling. This was it, the Dragon Jade Palace, Drakuro Thitag's toughest hidden dungeon, 100 floors of danger and treasure buried beneath a dying village. The final hope Nino had been searching for since the moment he accepted Barnabas's transfer. He gathered the group, Paula, Yoru, Ku, and Mia, a cheerful curly blonde village girl who had stepped up as their guide. Nino took the lead, warning everyone to stay sharp. Monsters could appear at any moment once they crossed the threshold. The 5 of them stepped into the darkness together, the roots closing in overhead like the jaws of something waiting. Behind them, the sunlight narrowed to a sliver, then vanished. Whatever lay ahead, there was no turning back. The adventure to save the village, and the world beyond it, had officially begun. The moment they stepped past the threshold, the dungeon revealed itself. Massive crystals jutted from the rocky walls, casting pale light across the cavern in every direction. The scale of it was staggering. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, the passages wide enough for entire buildings. Nino and his companions stood at the entrance of the Dragon Jade Palace, the hardest hidden dungeon in Drakuro Tsitu, a labyrinth that plunged beyond 100 floors and was rumored to hold the highest quality materials in the world. Paula took in the view and couldn't hide her amazement. She commented on the sheer scale of the place and noted the strategic importance of what lay inside. If Nino's plan was right, the resources in this dungeon could be the key to saving the village. Nino confirmed it. He had prepared thoroughly before bringing them down here, and the conditions matched exactly what he remembered from the game. The labyrinth was real, and everything he needed was somewhere in its depths. Mia, meanwhile, was beside herself. The sparkling stones embedded in the dungeon walls had her bouncing with excitement, her curly blonde hair swinging as she darted from crystal to crystal, eyes wide. Nino watched her with a mix of amusement and concern. This little troublemaker had more energy than anyone else in the group combined. She urged everyone to push deeper, eager to see what else was waiting, but Paula cautioned her not to get carried away. There were monsters down here, and excitement wouldn't protect her from them. As they moved further in, Nino reflected on how they had gotten to this point. It had all happened fast. The carriage ride, arriving at the village, discovering the drought, triggering the event with Dirk, and now this. He thought back to the preparations and conversations that had led to the expedition. Mia's backstory surfaced in his mind. She was the village shopkeeper, lively and warm, the kind of person who knew everyone and never sat still. When they needed a guide who knew the terrain around the village, she had volunteered without hesitation. But there was a line Nino needed to draw. As they approached a deeper cavern where the air grew heavier and the crystals dimmed, he turned to Mia and told her firmly not to follow beyond this point. The dangers ahead were real, the kind that could kill someone without combat experience. Mia's expression shifted, the excitement drained from her face, replaced first by surprise, then by something harder, determination. She told him she couldn't just turn around and leave them. She refused to abandon the group, not when they were going into danger for the sake of her village. Her voice carried an emotional weight that surprised even Nino. This wasn't stubbornness, it was loyalty. Nino studied her face and saw that she meant it. Every instinct told him to send her back, to keep her safe. But the resolve in her eyes was unmistakable, and he understood what it meant to her. He balanced his protective instincts against the bond the group had already formed, and in the end, he relented. Mia was staying. The 5 of them would face whatever came next together. It didn't take long for Mia to start causing problems. She scooped up a stone from the ground and held it up to Nino with bright, hopeful eyes, asking if it could be used as material for something. Her hands were clasped together, her whole body leaning forward with anticipation. Nino gulped, feeling bad about what he had to say. He started with her name, his tone already apologetic, and told her it wasn't usable. Mia didn't miss a beat. She grabbed another object and suggested that one instead. Then another and another. Each time, Nino had to turn her down. No, still no. She was relentless, but none of it was viable. Before he could explain further, Mia declared she would search deeper inside and took off running down the passage. Nino called after her, telling her to wait, but she was already gone, her voice echoing back with a surprised yelp. A moment later, he heard a crash. Mia had lost her footing, arms flailing wildly as she toppled backward onto the rocky ground. She lay there tangled among the stones, groaning, questioning every decision that had led her to this expedition. Nino stood over her, a thought crossing his mind that he couldn't quite push away. When Was it safe to have brought an inexperienced village girl like Mia into a place like this? In Drakuro 2, Mia had never been a combatant. She was a shopkeeper NPC, charming, helpful, but strictly non-combat. She had never joined the player in battle, not once across the entire game. And yet, here she was, face down on a dungeon floor, covered in dust. He offered his hand and asked if she could stand. Mia took it sheepishly, thanking him and admitting she was just a village girl after all. The moment of levity ended fast. Something shifted in the air, a faint, wet sound, barely perceptible. Nino sensed it first, a prickle at the back of his neck. He told himself it was just his imagination. Then a slime appeared. It looked almost harmless at first, the kind of low-level enemy any RPG player would dismiss without a second thought. But then, a massive fanged mouth split open across its surface, and the whole thing lunged. Someone shouted and pointed, an intruder. The group snapped into combat readiness. Nino assessed the threat quickly and realized these weren't ordinary slimes. They were water slimes, and they were far stronger than their appearance suggested. Capable of devouring anyone who got too close, they began gathering in the passage ahead, their translucent bodies pulsing ominously as more of them oozed from the walls and crevices. Mia's face went pale. She backed up, terrified, convinced they were all going to die. Nino steadied her, keeping his voice calm despite the grim odds stacking against them. He made his decision fast. They weren't retreating. "No, we'll break through," he said, and the certainty in his voice cut through the panic. The group rallied around him. There was something else down here worth fighting for: labyrinth water, a clean underground water source that could solve the village's drought if they could reach it. That alone made the risk worth taking. The slimes were strong, but so was their reason for being here. Nino pulled up his command menu and checked the stats of everyone in the party, reviewing strengths and weaknesses. He had prepared for exactly this kind of situation. Before entering the dungeon, he had distributed enhancement potions to the entire group, carefully crafted boosts designed to push their combat abilities beyond their natural limits. He noted the numbers shifting on his display and allowed himself a quiet breath of confidence. The effects should be kicking in right about now. Whatever these slimes had in store, the party was ready for them. The potions kicked in right when it mattered most. Mia screamed a warning, "Pao-sama, watch out!" as a slime launched itself straight at Paula. Paula saw it coming but couldn't dodge in time. She braced herself, admitting through gritted teeth that she wasn't going to make it out of the way. But instead of crumpling, she moved. Her body spun with a speed and precision that hadn't been there moments ago, and she unleashed a magical attack that detonated on impact, blasting the slime apart in a burst of energy. The explosion rippled through the cavern. Paula's own eyes went wide as she watched the aftermath. She hadn't expected that kind of power from her own body. The surprise quickly turned to confusion. A shimmering aura surrounded her, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She stared at her hands and muttered in disbelief, asking what in the world was happening to her. Behind her, Mia shrieked in astonishment, demanding to know what that attack had been. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Had Paula always been this strong? The answer came from Nino, calm as ever. He explained that it was the enhancement potion. He had crafted it specifically for this dungeon expedition, using natural ingredients to boost both attack and defense. It was designed to make their fights more manageable, to give them an edge they wouldn't have on their own. He held up one of the remaining vials, a small, carefully prepared concoction that belied its potency. Nino stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had planned for exactly this scenario. He told the group the fight should be a bit easier from here on out. The potion was doing its job, but even with the boost, they weren't out of trouble. The slimes kept coming, pressing them from multiple angles, and the party was stuck in a defensive posture. Nino's expression tightened. He scanned the battlefield anxiously, his mind racing through every option he could think of. There had to be a way to turn this around. They couldn't just keep blocking and dodging forever. They needed an offensive breakthrough, something to shift the momentum in their favor. That was when he saw it. He pulled up Mia's information on his command menu, and what he found stopped him cold. Mia had a status screen, a full one, levels, stats, skill slots, the works. His head snapped toward her. "Mia has a status screen too?" The words came out louder than he intended, disbelief and excitement colliding in his voice. In Drakuro Todu, only characters with real combat potential had status screens. Shopkeepers, villagers, background NPCs, none of them qualified. Having a status screen meant you could level up, learn skills, and grow into a genuine fighter. And Mia, the clumsy village shopkeeper who tripped over rocks and couldn't tell a useful material from a pebble, she had one. Hidden beneath the surface of that cheerful, everyday exterior was latent magic talent that nobody, not even Mia herself, had ever known about. The revelation changed everything. They were pinned down by slimes, running low on options, fighting just to hold their ground. And suddenly, the weakest member of the party wasn't weak at all. She was untapped potential. A glimmer of hope cut through the tension, sharp and bright. Whatever came next in the Dragon Jade Palace, they had just found something more valuable than any material or treasure. They had found a fighter who didn't know she was one yet. Nino didn't waste a second. He dropped down at a flat surface, surrounded by the ingredients he had been carrying: purified water, man-headed flower's nectar, black-winged goat's tail, and began working. Mia hovered nearby, watching curiously as he laid everything out with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He ran analysis first, breaking each ingredient down to its base properties, then moved to extraction, pulling out exactly what he needed with surgical precision. Then came the critical step. He brought the extracted components together and focused everything he had into the process. Mixing, his expression hardened with concentration, every ounce of his attention locked onto the transmutation. One wrong ratio, and the entire potion would be worthless. Paula watched from behind, her eyes widening as she tracked the flow of magic through his hands. The precision was extraordinary. 6 colors of magic, woven together with a control she had never seen in anyone. She thought to herself that his magical control was genuinely amazing, the kind of skill that shouldn't belong to someone who called himself a handyman. Nino urged the process forward internally, willing it to work. This transmutation wasn't just another experiment. It was the key to saving the village, the thing that would unlock Mia's latent potential and give them a fighting chance against the slimes that had them cornered. He glanced at Mia's status screen one more time, confirming what he already knew. "I see a way out," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's you, Mia. You are the one who will change this situation." Mia stared at him blankly. A confused sound escaped her lips before the full meaning registered. Then the panic hit. She waved her hands frantically, backing up, her voice cracking as she cried out that she had never fought a monster before in her entire life. The fear was real. She was a shopkeeper, not a warrior. Nino studied her, weighing whether she could actually harness the power hidden inside her. The potential was there. The question was whether she could access it in time. But first, he had to finish the potion, and that meant doing something extremely dangerous, transmuting in the middle of an active battle. He knew the risks. The moment he diverted his magic into the alchemy process, the enhancement effects on the rest of the party would temporarily weaken. Everyone would be more vulnerable while he worked. It was a brutal trade-off, but there was no other option. He told the group what was about to happen. They had to endure it. The slimes surged. With Nino's focus locked on the transmutation, the party's defenses dipped, and the creatures pressed in harder. Then, Paula was there, throwing herself between Nino and an incoming attack, deflecting it with raw effort and willpower. She fought with everything she had, her body straining under the reduced enhancements, buying Nino the seconds he needed. He felt the impact shudder through the ground beside him and realized how close that had been. Paula had saved him. Without her, the transmutation would have failed, and he would have taken that hit head on. The potion crystallized in his hands, a large jewel-adorned vial, glowing with concentrated magical energy. He turned to Mia and pressed it into her grip, telling her urgently to drink it. Mia's eyes lit up at the sight of it. The vial was beautiful, almost regal, and she accepted it with an excited gasp, ready to unlock whatever power was waiting inside her. She brought it to her lips, tilted it back, and immediately spat it out. Her face twisted in pure horror as the taste hit her. "It's way too disgusting! I can't drink this!" she shrieked, holding the vial at arm's length like it had personally offended her. Nino's jaw dropped. He stared at her, every ounce of tension from the life or death transmutation evaporating into disbelief. He had nearly gotten killed crafting that potion. Paula had thrown herself into danger to protect him, and Mia couldn't even get it down because it tasted bad. Nino stared at the potion jar, and then it hit him. The ingredient he had added for immediate effect, that was what had ruined the taste. Unlike the potions he had given Paula and the others, which worked gradually over time, Mia's needed to activate right now, in the middle of combat. That extra component was necessary, but it had turned the whole thing into something barely drinkable. He let out a defeated sigh, so that was the problem. Mia looked at him with worried eyes and asked if he should remake it. Nino considered it, but the math didn't work. They didn't have the time or the ingredients for a second attempt. Across the cavern, Paula called out that the party had reached their limits. The slimes were closing in, and the enhancement effects were fading. Nino's face drained of color as reality crashed down. Their way out was gone. Paula confirmed it flatly. They couldn't afford to start over. The group pulled back to higher ground, putting distance between themselves and the slimes below. Nino weighed whether retreat was the only option left. The monsters regrouped beneath them, patient and relentless. Mia stood at the edge, holding the potion in both hands, staring down at the vial with a solemn expression. She asked quietly if this was really all they had managed to accomplish down here. Her mind drifted back to the village. She remembered the women talking about the well, how even after trying everything, they couldn't expect much from it anymore. The water was gone. She remembered another woman slumped over her desk, whispering about what they should do now, the exhaustion in her voice carrying the weight of an entire community running out of hope. Mia had been standing in the doorway that day, watching, listening, feeling the pressure settle over her like a stone. She had murmured to herself that she understood, and now, standing in a dungeon with slimes gathering below and a disgusting potion in her hands, Mia made her choice. She straightened up, and the uncertainty vanished from her face. She was the one who could change things, not just here in the dungeon, but for everyone back home. The women at the well, the tired faces, the dying fields. Nino's words echoed through her. She was the one who would change this situation. She raised the potion to her lips. Nino saw what she was about to do and shouted at her. She didn't need to drink it all at once, but Mia wasn't listening anymore. She tilted the vial back and forced the entire contents down her throat in one go, sweat rolling down her face, her body shaking from the effort. She gagged, her eyes watering, but she didn't stop. Every swallow was an act of pure willpower. She finished the last drop and coughed violently, doubling over. Someone rushed to her side and asked if she was all right. She answered in a strained voice, rough but recovering, that she was fine. Nino leaned closer and asked if the potion was working, his eyes searching her for any sign of the transformation he had been counting on. Mia caught her breath and looked up at him. Her eyes had changed, brighter, steadier, lit with something that hadn't been there before. She told him it was working. She could feel it. Energy flooded through her body, a warmth spreading from her core to her fingertips, and with it came something entirely new. She was ready. Nino exhaled with relief and told her the rest was in her hands. Mia stepped forward to the edge of the elevated ground, extended her hand toward the swarm of slimes below, and let the magic flow. It came naturally, as if it had always been there, just waiting to be called. A swirling vortex of magical energy coiled around her arm and erupted outward, the force of it rippling through the cavern. Nino watched from behind, genuinely impressed. He thought to himself that Mia's power was remarkable, raw, unpolished, but undeniably real. The energy intensified, wrapping around Mia's entire body in a brilliant cascade. Her status flickered into Nino's command menu, HP 1, MP 2 out of 3, with skill slots now populated. Fire magic, water magic. She was fragile, almost impossibly so, with barely any health to speak of, but her magical potential was genuine. Mia, the clumsy village shopkeeper who had never fought a monster in her life, stood wreathed in light, a fully awakened mage taking her first real stance against the enemy. The dungeon had just given them their missing piece. Mia unleashed everything she had. Fire erupted from her outstretched hand in a raging torrent, tearing through the swarm of slimes below with devastating force. The magic enhancement potion had supercharged her abilities far beyond what anyone expected. The flames roared across the cavern, incinerating slimes on contact. The heat, so intense, it warped the air around them. Paula and Nino watched from behind, their faces lit by the blaze, expressions caught between astonishment and sheer excitement. Neither of them had imagined this kind of firepower from a girl who had been tripping over rocks an hour ago. When the flames died down and the last slime dissolved into nothing, the group erupted. Mia spun around, flushed with adrenaline, barely able to contain herself. She couldn't believe she had just done that. Her, of all people, pulling off something that insane. Nino told her she did great, and Paula echoed the praise. Mia's expression shifted from disbelief to something dangerously close to smugness. She wondered aloud if maybe she was a genius. Nino noticed the ego inflating in real time and quietly noted to himself that Mia had a tendency to get carried away. The excitement settled, and Mia's curiosity took over. She turned to Nino and asked him directly, how had he known she had magic power? She called him Sensei, a name that had stuck somewhere along the way. Nino picked up a lantern-like object nearby, a device built with luminous stones that glowed in response to magical energy. He explained that it reacted to anyone with magic power, and once he had been able to see Mia's status screen, her latent abilities became obvious. The potential had been there all along, she just hadn't known it. His tone softened. He told her sincerely that she had saved them back there. Without her, they would have been forced to retreat with nothing to show for it. Mia's cheeks flushed, and she waved it off with a cheerful laugh, insisting it was nothing. But the warmth in her expression said she had taken the words to heart. The mood lifted further as the group gathered themselves and pushed deeper into the dungeon. Mia was practically bouncing, urging everyone forward with infectious enthusiasm. "Onward," she declared. More dungeon adventure awaited. The passage narrowed, then opened again into a vast chamber, unlike anything they had seen before. And there it was. A colossal slime sat at the center of the room, dwarfing every creature they had fought so far. Its body pulsed with a dark, viscous energy, its mass filling nearly half the chamber. The group stopped dead. Mia whispered that it was huge. Nino assessed it instantly. A floor boss, the guardian of the first level. Defeating it was the only way forward. And behind that massive body, barely visible through the creature's translucent bulk, was the thing they had come here for. "It's labyrinth water," someone shouted, spotting the clean, shimmering water source flowing at the back of the chamber. The answer to the village's drought was right there, just past the most dangerous enemy they had faced yet. Then the boss moved. Its body lurched upward, swelling and reshaping, rising higher and higher until it towered over the entire party. The transformation was grotesque, its surface splitting open to reveal rows of jagged, fang-like protrusions, its mass doubling in size as it took on a monstrous new form. Mia screamed, her earlier bravado crumbling in an instant. Paula's eyes narrowed as she braced herself, warning the group that this thing looked genuinely dangerous. The chamber trembled under the creature's weight, and the labyrinth water glinted behind it like a promise just out of reach. Mia didn't hesitate. She channeled everything into her strongest fire attack and launched it straight at the giant slime. Flames surged across the chamber in a massive wave, the heat blistering the air as the inferno slammed into the boss. Nino braced himself behind her, his expression locked in determination, ready for whatever came next. But the fire barely left a mark. The slime's body absorbed the impact, its watery mass shuddering but reforming almost instantly. Before anyone could regroup, the creature retaliated. It erupted upward through the ground with explosive force, sending rock and debris flying in every direction. One of them shouted in shock as the chamber tore apart around them. The blast wave hit the party full on. Nino was thrown into the air, and he saw Mia tumbling beside him, her face frozen between surprise and terror. He reached out and grabbed her mid-flight, pulling her close as they both crashed back down, the impact rattling through his bones. As the dust and rubble settled, the full scope of what they were dealing with became clear. Someone voiced what everyone was thinking. This slime was on a completely different level. It was stronger, faster, and more resilient than anything they had encountered on the first floor. The smaller slimes had been nothing compared to this. Mia looked at Nino with desperation in her eyes. Her fire attacks weren't working. She told him directly. Fire had no effect on this thing. The matchup was all wrong. A water-type boss shrugging off fire magic like it was nothing. Nino's jaw clenched as he processed the situation. He had one option left: the staff. He thought of the weapon tucked away in his inventory, a formidable magical artifact capable of unleashing a devastating lightning strike. Lightning against a water-type boss would be lethal, but the cost was enormous. Using the staff would drain every drop of his remaining magic power in a single discharge, one shot. That was all he would get. If it missed or failed to finish the job, they would have nothing left. The math was brutal. A one-hit kill was their only path. But the boss slime's body was too resilient to take the full force of the lightning without some kind of opening. They needed a weak point, a gap in its defenses where the strike could penetrate deep enough to destroy it from the inside. Without that, even lightning wouldn't be enough. That was when Paula stepped forward. Her expression was calm, confident, carrying the steady assurance of someone who had already worked out the answer. She proposed using the smaller slimes she had brought under her control with her subordination skill. If she directed them into the boss's body, they could force an opening from within, a crack in the giant slime's structure, just wide enough for the lightning to exploit. She would craft the weak point herself. Nino stared at her, caught off guard by the precision of the plan. It was exactly what they needed. He didn't question it. He told Paula the task was hers, and the weight of the entire battle shifted onto her shoulders. She accepted without flinching. The boss loomed above them, massive and seemingly invincible, but for the first time since the fight began, they had a real strategy. One opening, one strike, one chance to end it. Paula moved into position without a shred of hesitation. She stood among a cluster of smaller slimes she had tamed, their sharp-clawed forms flanking her on either side. Her expression was calm, almost serene, even as the massive boss slime pulsed and shifted above them. She was in her element. Nino watched from behind, his nerves fraying. He turned to Mia, voice tight, asking what was happening. Mia looked equally uncertain, her eyes darting between Paula and the towering creature. The atmosphere was frantic, the boss's body heaving, as if preparing for another devastating strike. Before anyone could react, the giant slime lashed out. The blow came straight at Nino, a direct hit that sent debris scattering across the chamber. "Sensei!" Mia screamed, her face twisting with panic as she watched him take the impact, but Nino held his ground. He grunted through the force of it, telling her he was fine. He had activated Iron Defense just in time, channeling reinforcement magic through his body to absorb the blow. The defense held, barely. He admitted openly that this was about the limit of what he could do. He had no offensive skills, not a single attack in his arsenal. All he was good for was support, shielding, and buying time. Mia's expression crumbled with guilt. She insisted the hit had been her fault, that she should have been covering him. Nino shook his head and told her not to dwell on it. What mattered now was holding on. They had to trust Paula. They had to endure until she could create the opening. Paula, meanwhile, was already in motion. She approached the boss with a confidence that bordered on reckless, her eyes locked on the creature's massive form, reading its movements. But then Mia faltered. The fire flickering around her hands sputtered and died. Her magic power was completely spent. Every last drop of MP drained from the battle. She slumped, barely able to stand. Nino saw it immediately. Mia had hit her limit. With only 1 HP and no magic left, she was done. The party had lost their only offensive mage. Then something unexpected happened. 2 small slimes, Lu and Sui, blue and agile, broke away from the group and hurled themselves at the giant boss. They burrowed into its surface, attacking from the inside, tearing at its structure. Mia's eyes went wide. She stammered in confusion, asking if the boss was fighting itself. Infighting? Among slimes? Paula walked up beside her, perfectly composed, and corrected her. That wasn't infighting. She smiled and explained simply. They were her familiars. Lu and Sui belonged to her. She had tamed them and sent them in deliberately. The revelation stunned the group. Nino stared, taken aback, that Paula had been preparing this move the entire time. She turned to face him and told him clearly to leave the rest to her. There was no uncertainty in her voice, no room for argument. This was her battle now. She directed Lu and Sui with precise commands, orchestrating their assault from within the boss's body. The 2 small slimes worked in perfect unison, carving deeper, disrupting the giant's internal structure, weakening it from the inside out. The boss thrashed and convulsed, unable to dislodge the tiny invaders eating away at its defenses. Nino watched the progress with growing astonishment. 2 creatures that seemed insignificant next to the floor boss were systematically dismantling it, guided by Paula's unwavering control. Her allies could only stare. Paula's mastery over her familiars was something none of them had fully understood until this moment. She wasn't just commanding them, she was reading the boss's body, anticipating its movements, and positioning Lu and Sui with surgical precision. The chaotic tension that had gripped the chamber since the fight began was finally, steadily, turning in their favor. Paula smiled as Lu and Sui completed their work. She had them completely under her control. Every movement, every angle of attack, perfectly synchronized. Her subordination skill was the key to all of it, allowing her to charm and command monsters as a monster tamer. It was a rare and powerful ability, and Nino was genuinely surprised by how far her mastery extended. He had known she was capable, but this was something else entirely. Then he saw it. A hole had opened at the top of the giant slime, a gap in its body where Lu and Sui had hollowed out its defenses from within. Paula turned to him and told him the opening was ready. It was now or never. Nino pulled the staff from his inventory and gripped it tight. He channeled every last drop of his remaining magic power into the weapon, pushing for maximum output. The staff hummed, then crackled, energy arcing along its surface as the charge built. He aimed directly at the hole Paula's familiars had carved and called the attack. Thunder! Lightning exploded from the staff in a blinding column, tearing through the air and slamming into the exposed weak point. The bolt punched straight through the boss's body, and for a split second, the entire chamber went white. The giant slime detonated. Its body blew apart in a massive explosion, chunks of slime raining down across the cavern, splattering everyone. Nino, Mia, Paula, all of them, in a shower of viscous debris. Paula stood in the foreground, watching the remnants scatter, while Nino lowered the spent staff beside her. It was over. The silence that followed felt enormous. Nino let out a long breath, the tension draining from his body all at once. He turned to Paula and told her they could have been in serious trouble if they hadn't used the staff when they did, without her spotting the solution, creating the weak point for the lightning to exploit. The fight could have gone very differently. Paula thanked him quietly for trusting her judgment. The exchange was simple, but the weight behind it was real. Nino found himself replaying the battle in his head. Paula had seen the answer almost instantly. The moment the boss appeared, she had already been working on a plan. Her instincts were sharper than anyone he had ever met, almost unnervingly so. Mia piped up from behind, joking that maybe Paula had psychic abilities. Paula laughed softly and waved it off, calling it nothing more than luck. But Nino wasn't so sure. There was a depth to Paula that he hadn't fully grasped yet, layers he couldn't quite see through. He wondered about the things he didn't know about her, the parts of her nature she kept hidden. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Not distrust exactly, but an awareness that this woman was far more perceptive than she let on. He shelved the thought. There was something more important right in front of them. Behind the defeated boss, where the giant slime had been guarding, the labyrinth water flowed, clean, pure, and shimmering under the dungeon's crystal light, an untouched water source deep beneath the earth. The group gathered at the edge and stared. After everything the village had suffered, after the drought and the dying fields and the empty well, the answer had been down here all along. They took a moment to simply breathe, letting the sight of clean water wash over them. Paula broke the quiet. She turned to Nino, and her tone shifted, still gentle, but pointed. She suggested that maybe it was time for him to share what he really knew. She had noticed it, the way he navigated the dungeon, the way he recognized things before he should have been able to. She asked about the deeper aspects of the labyrinth, the knowledge he clearly possessed, but hadn't explained. Nino stiffened. He hadn't expected her to push on it this soon. For a long moment, he stared at the water, choosing his words carefully. Then, he deflected. He brushed the topic aside, steering the conversation back to more immediate concerns, making it clear he wasn't ready to open that door yet. Paula watched him, her expression unreadable. She didn't press further, but the question hung between them like the crack in the moon, visible, undeniable, and impossible to ignore forever. The group pressed deeper into the dungeon, the tension of the boss fight still lingering in their muscles, but the mood surprisingly light. Nino walked at the front with Paula beside him, while Mia trailed behind with Yoru and Ku bounding around her feet. Everyone was battered, slime-splattered, and tired, but alive, and that counted for something. As they walked, Nino caught something in Paula's tone that made him pause. She mentioned something about what lay deeper inside the dungeon, something she shouldn't have had any way of knowing. He turned to her, surprised, and asked how she knew about that. Paula gave him a teasing look and asked if she had guessed right. The playful confidence in her expression told him she already knew the answer. Before he could respond, she explained herself. From traveling with him, she had learned to read his body language, his posture, his micro-expressions, the way his eyes shifted when he was about to make a decision. She could tell when he was planning something new, when he was about to give an order, even when he was holding back information. She knew his habits better than he realized, and she found that both impressive and a little frightening. Nino felt the weight of her observations settle over him like a spotlight. Being watched that closely made him uneasy. It wasn't that he didn't trust Paula. He did, more than almost anyone. But the idea of someone reading him that accurately, especially when he was carrying the kinds of secrets he was, put him on edge. Paula sensed his discomfort and softened. She admitted she watched him closely because she wanted to be able to support him the moment he needed it. Her gaze was intense, earnest, and completely sincere. Nino felt his face warm. Asking her to stop watching him felt impossible when her reason for doing it was that selfless. They walked side by side in quieter conversation, circling back to what had been nagging at him since the boss fight. The labyrinth water was a massive discovery, clean, pure, a lifeline for the village. But Paula had picked up on something Nino hadn't said out loud. She told him she had noticed he wasn't fully happy about it. There was something else bothering him, something beyond the water. Nino admitted she was right. He was still working through the bigger picture, still trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together. The water would help, but it wasn't the whole answer. He assured her he wasn't trying to hide anything. He just didn't have it all figured out yet. Paula accepted that without pushing further, though the understanding between them deepened. There were things he couldn't explain to everyone, and Paula seemed to grasp that instinctively. She noted that some of it would be hard to explain to Mia, who was already ahead of them, exploring the oasis-like spring with boundless enthusiasm. Mia stood at the water's edge, eyes sparkling, comparing the underground pool to a hidden oasis. She marveled at how beautiful it was. The crystal clear surface, the gentle shimmer under the dungeon light, the lush calm of the space after the violence of the boss chamber. Then, without a word of warning, Mia scooped up a handful of water and drank it. Nino's heart nearly stopped. He called out to her, alarmed. She hadn't even checked if it was safe, but Mia was already swallowing, and her face broke into pure joy. She declared it was delicious, the cleanest, purest water she had tasted in as long as she could remember. Nino tensed for a moment, running through what he knew. The slimes that had inhabited this area acted as natural purifiers. Their presence meant the water should be safe for consumption. He let himself relax, just slightly. Mia kept drinking, her expression soft with something close to nostalgia, murmuring about how long it had been since she'd had water this good. For a girl from a village that had watched its river dry up and its well go empty, this moment was more than refreshment. It was hope given form. Mia's face was glowing. She turned to the group with the brightest smile she had worn all day and declared that now everyone in the village could be saved too. The water was here, clean, abundant, real. She said she wanted to bring some back to her mother as soon as possible, her voice bubbling with an urgency born from months of watching her village wither. For Mia, this wasn't abstract, this was personal. Nino watched her happiness and felt something twist in his chest. He had to tell her the truth. He called her name, his expression shifting to something more somber. Mia noticed immediately. She asked what was wrong, her cheerful tone dimming to concern. He told her plainly, the labyrinth water alone wasn't enough to save the villagers. The words landed hard. Mia's eyes went wide, shock and confusion flooding her face. She couldn't understand. She had thought clean water was the answer, the whole reason they had fought the boss and nearly died. Nino explained that the drought wasn't a simple problem with a simple fix. Securing water was important, but it was only a sign of a much greater disaster looming over everything. They needed to push deeper into the dungeon, to reach a certain destination further down and confirm its existence. Only then could they truly protect the village and everyone in it. The weight of it settled over Mia. Nino apologized, assuring her he hadn't been lying or holding back maliciously. He just hadn't been able to explain the full scope of things until now. Mia listened quietly, the reality of their mission's gravity sinking in deeper than before. She considered whether they should turn back, regroup, make sure the village was safe before going further. But the hesitation didn't last. Mia straightened up and told the group they should move forward. Her voice carried a firmness that surprised even her. If the water wasn't enough, then they had to keep going until they found what was. Then the tension broke. Mia admitted with a sheepish grin that getting to fire off magic non-stop was actually pretty fun. The confession was so honest and so perfectly Mia that it cut right through the heaviness of the moment. Nino gave her a look and pointed out that was clearly her real reason for wanting to continue. Mia didn't even try to deny it. The group shared a brief laugh, and for a moment, the dungeon felt a little less oppressive. The practical questions followed. Mia asked whether they could at least bring some of the labyrinth water back to the village. It seemed like a waste to leave it all behind after fighting so hard to reach it. Nino told her to leave it to him. His tone was confident, the kind of assurance that came from already having a plan in mind. He walked over to the remains of the boss slime and crouched beside the scattered debris. Then he got to work. Using his alchemy, he performed a transmutation on the monster's remains, extracting materials that made Mia's jaw drop. Boss Slime's hide, a blue magic stone chunk, valuable components pulled directly from the defeated creature's body. Mia stared, barely able to process what she was seeing. She blurted out in astonishment that you could actually get useful stuff from monsters. Nino explained that defeating monsters granted access to their materials and magic stones, resources that couldn't be obtained any other way. He took the extracted materials and began merging them through another transmutation, his hands working with practiced precision. The slime hide reshaped under his magic, forming into a durable, flexible container, a slime bag capable of holding water without leaking, perfect for transporting the labyrinth water back to the surface. Nino held it up with a satisfied expression, confirming this was exactly what they needed. The dungeon had given them not just the water itself, but the means to carry it home. Every piece of the puzzle was coming together, one transmutation at a time. The finished slime hide bag exceeded everyone's expectations. Nino demonstrated its capacity, filling it with water until the elastic material stretched far beyond what any normal container could hold. The bag expanded and contracted freely, adapting to whatever volume it carried without tearing or leaking. Paula's eyes lit up. She remarked on how useful it was, already seeing the potential for hauling large quantities back to the village in a single trip. Nino added another detail that raised the excitement further. Water wasn't just for drinking. It could serve as a transmutation material too. The labyrinth water, with its purity and magical properties, opened up new alchemy possibilities he hadn't had access to before. That revelation was all it took. Mia and Paula immediately turned it into a competition, challenging each other over who could fill the most bags. The playful rivalry sparked out of nowhere, and Nino watched the two of them squaring off with mild concern, surprised by how fast the mood had shifted from dungeon survival to competitive water hauling. He tried to rein them in, reminding them the point was just to gather water, not to turn it into a contest. But Mia and Paula were already in motion, grabbing bags and racing to the spring's edge with an enthusiasm that completely ignored his warning. They cheered each other on, both insisting their task was the most important thing they could be doing right now. The filling process went smoothly at first, until it didn't. The slime hide bags felt strange in their hands. The texture was soft, squishy, almost uncomfortably organic. Mia fumbled with hers, commenting that the feel of it was nothing like she expected. Paula, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy the sensation, squeezing the filled bag and noting how perfectly it fit in her grip, how satisfyingly soft it was. The moment stretched into absurdity as she indulged in the tactile experience while Mia stared at her, caught between amusement and bewilderment. Nino stood to the side, wondering how a life-or-death dungeon expedition had devolved into this. He called them back to focus, half scolding, half laughing at their antics. The mission was still the mission, regardless of how entertaining the bags were to handle. He also reminded them that the bags had durability limits. The slime hide was tough, but not indestructible. If they overfilled them, there would be consequences. The warning came about 3 seconds too late. One of the bags, stretched well past capacity, split at the seam and exploded in a burst of water that drenched everyone in the vicinity. Mia shrieked. Paula stood dripping, blinking in surprise. Nino, soaked from head to toe, gave them both a flat look and suggested they start over. The two women apologized, still half laughing at the mess, and got back to filling bags, more carefully this time. While the water gathering operation reset, something else caught Nino's attention. Off to the side, Yoru and Ku had wandered over to the remains of the giant boss slime and were happily nibbling on it. Their small mouths worked at the gelatinous material with alarming contentment, as though they had found the most delicious snack in the dungeon. Nino and Paula exchanged a look. He voiced his concern about their stomachs. Eating raw monster remains couldn't possibly be healthy. Paula questioned what it even tasted like, but the twins showed no signs of distress. If anything, they seemed energized by the meal, their little bodies practically humming with satisfaction. Whatever the boss slime was made of, Yoru and Ku were treating it like a feast, and there was no sign of stopping them anytime soon. Nino watched the twins devour the boss slime remains and let his thoughts settle on what he already suspected. Their eat skill wasn't just a quirk, it was a genuine combat ability. Consuming monster materials could strengthen them, granting stat boosts and even natural equipment. If the boss slime's hide was as durable as the bags he had crafted from it, then absorbing that material could give Yoru and Ku a serious defensive upgrade. He murmured to himself that it might actually come in handy. He made the call. He told Yoru and Ku to eat up, finish the whole thing. The twins didn't need to be told twice, tearing into the remaining slime corpse with renewed enthusiasm. Behind him, Mia watched the scene unfold with wide, uncertain eyes and asked if that was really okay. Nino assured her it was. The twins knew what they were doing, even if it looked disturbing from the outside. The group gathered around, some curious, some mildly horrified, as Yoru and Ku methodically worked through the massive slug-like remains until there was nothing left. With the boss room cleared and the water gathered, Nino turned his attention forward. He told the group it was time to descend to the second floor. The deeper levels of the Dragon Jade Palace were waiting, and they had already spent too long on the first. He took a step toward the passage leading down. Mia's voice stopped him cold. She called out with alarm, telling him to wait. This might be bad. Nino turned back, asking what was wrong. The answer came with a sheepish wince. Mia confessed that she had completely run out of magic power. Her MP was at 0. Every drop spent on the fire attacks against the slimes. She had nothing left. Then, Paula spoke up, her tone carrying the same reluctant honesty. She addressed Nino as "my dear" and admitted that she was nearly depleted as well. Between commanding Lu and Sui, maintaining subordination during the boss fight, and the general strain of the first floor, her reserves were almost gone. The two of them stood there, drained and deflated. Mia's face crumbled as she asked what they were supposed to do now. Without magic, were they just dead weight? The fear in her voice was real. She had only just discovered her abilities, and the thought of being useless this, after everything they had been through, was crushing, Nino didn't let the worry take hold. He looked at both of them with a calm, confident expression and told them not to worry. He had a plan for exactly this situation. He reached into his inventory and began preparing something. Labyrinth water, combined with dungeon moss he had collected earlier, transmuted into a new concoction, a magic recovery potion, the kind of thing that could restore spent MP and get them back in fighting shape. He held it out with a grin, his eyes on Mia, and told her that with this, she could fire off magic non-stop all over again. Mia's face lit up like the sun coming out. Paula exhaled with quiet relief. The second floor was waiting below them, darker and more dangerous than anything they had faced so far, but the party was about to walk into it fully restored and ready for whatever came next. Mia took the magic recovery potion and drank it without any of the drama from last time. A flame-like energy flickered to life in her palm almost immediately, warm and steady. Her eyes went wide. The magic had returned, not gradually, not in trickles, but all at once. She held up her hand in amazement and declared it was incredible that her power had come back in an instant. Paula watched beside her, equally astonished by the speed of the recovery. Nino explained how it worked. The magic recovery potion was made from labyrinth water and Mary moss, a rare dungeon plant. The combination could restore depleted magic reserves in seconds, effectively giving them a renewable source of combat power as long as they had the ingredients. Mia's imagination took off immediately. She pictured herself with infinite magic power and announced, with all the gravity of someone making a historic declaration, that her era had arrived. Nino let the moment breathe for exactly 1 second before reminding her that her fire bullets had been completely useless against the water slimes on the first floor. Mia's triumphant expression deflated slightly, but she recovered fast. With their magic restored, the party descended. The passage narrowed and darkened as they moved into the second floor of the labyrinth. Nino led the way with a lantern, the rocky walls closing in around them, visibility dropping with every step. Strange sounds echoed from somewhere ahead, scraping, clicking, the kind of noises that made skin crawl. The atmosphere thickened with suspense. Mia, riding the high of her restored power, walked behind Nino with a confidence that bordered on reckless. She considered herself basically unbeatable now that she had magic again. Nino glanced back and told her to stay alert. Confidence was fine, but overconfidence in a dungeon would get her killed. Then, a skeletal creature lunged out of the darkness. Mia screamed, a full, unrestrained shriek that bounced off every wall in the passage. Nino shouted for Paula, and she was already moving. In one fluid motion, Paula struck the skeleton down, shattering it before it could reach anyone. The bones scattered across the floor, and the tension snapped like a rubber band. Nino looked at the pile of remains and remarked casually that it hadn't been much of an enemy. The contrast between Mia's terror and the creature's weakness was almost comical. They pushed forward, and the second floor revealed its theme: skeleton dogs everywhere. The passage opened into a wider area littered with massive bone debris, and hounds made of bleached white bone rose from the ground in packs, their empty eye sockets glowing faintly. Row after row of them blocked the path ahead. Someone commented that this floor was nothing but dogs. Mia had pressed herself against Nino's back, clinging to him with both hands. He told her flatly to stop clinging, though the fear in her grip made it clear she wasn't letting go anytime soon. Then the bats came. A wave of dark, screeching shapes dove from the ceiling without warning. Nino's memory fired instantly. He knew these from Drakuro too. Echo bats, the second floor's other threat. Their sonic screech could disorient and incapacitate anyone who heard it. He shouted that there were more enemies incoming, and the party braced for the second wave. But Nino was already 3 steps ahead. His hands moved in a blur. Transmutation, slicing, a rapid-fire crafting technique that produced small circular items in seconds. He distributed them to everyone, shouting at them to take the items quickly. Slime earplugs, molded from the boss slime's skin, perfectly shaped to block the bats' sonic attacks. With these in, the screech would be neutralized. They could fight without worrying about the sound. The party jammed the plugs into their ears, and just like that, the bats' greatest weapon was useless. Whatever this floor threw at them next, they were ready for it. There was just one problem. Nino held out the slime earplugs to distribute them properly, and the moment Mia and Paula got a good look at the gooey, wobbling pieces of slime in his hands, their faces twisted in disgust. The plugs were effective, but they were also repulsive, wet, slimy, and deeply unpleasant to touch. Paula's composure cracked for once, her expression shifting to visible discomfort. Mia didn't even try to hide her reaction. When Nino told her to take a piece, she shrieked and bolted, screaming that there was absolutely no way she was putting that in her ears. She ran from him like the slime was a living creature chasing her down. Nino sighed, He would deal with Mia's objections later. The party pressed forward into the depths of the second floor, and that was when they found it. Hanging from the cave ceiling in the boss chamber, massive and motionless, was the boss bat. Its wingspan dwarfed anything they had encountered, a creature of pure menace suspended above them like a dark omen. Someone pointed upward and identified it. If they could stop its movements, they would have a real chance at taking it down. Then the boss bat opened its mouth and screamed. The sound that erupted from it was nothing like the echo bats before. It was a concentrated blast of sonic energy that shook the walls and rattled the bones in their chests. Worse, it wasn't just an attack. It was a signal, a call. Within seconds, the ceiling came alive as dozens of smaller bats peeled away from the darkness and swarmed toward the party with terrifying speed. Someone shouted for everyone to get ready, but the warning barely registered over the noise. The sound wave hit them like a physical force, high-pitched, relentless. It tore through the group's concentration and hammered their ability to think. Mia doubled over with her hands clamped over her ears, her face contorted in pain. Paula gritted her teeth, fighting to stay upright. Even Yoru and Ku flinched under the assault. The screeching bored into their skulls, making it impossible to focus on anything, let alone fight back. Nino forced his voice through the wall of noise. He shouted at everyone to use the slime pieces, shove them in their ears right now. It was the only way. Mia's disgust no longer mattered. Survival trumped squeamishness. She fumbled for the gooey material with trembling, reluctant hands, her face scrunched in revulsion, even as the sonic attack pummeled her from every direction. Paula grabbed hers without complaint this time, priorities firmly rearranged. One by one, the party jammed the slime earplugs into place. The effect was immediate. The shrieking dropped from unbearable to a distant hum, then faded to almost nothing. The slime hide's elastic density was a perfect match for blocking high-frequency sound. It sealed against the ear canal and absorbed the vibrations before they could reach the inner ear. Nino explained as much once everyone had stopped wincing, and the group looked at him with a mixture of relief and grudging admiration. Disgusting or not, the earplugs had saved them. Mia straightened up, the pain clearing from her expression, replaced by something fiercer. She could hear herself think again. She could move, aim, focus. Paula rolled her shoulders and settled into a fighting stance, her calm fully restored. The bats were still swarming overhead, screeching at full volume, but it didn't matter anymore. The sound couldn't touch them. The party rallied. With the sonic threat neutralized, they were back on even footing, and they had the advantage of knowing exactly how to fight now. Nino took the lead, directing the group into formation. The boss bat hung above them, still screaming, still calling reinforcements, but the fear was gone. The party moved forward as one, determined and united, ready to bring the second floor's guardian down. With the earplugs in and the sonic threat neutralized, the bats were barely a challenge. The party tore through them with coordinated strikes, Yoru and Ku darting through the swarm, Paula commanding from the center, Mia firing magic from behind. Someone noted mid-fight that the bats' attack and defense power were shockingly low once you took away their screech. Without the sonic advantage, they were fragile. The boss bat roared from above, but even its imposing presence couldn't change the numbers. The team worked in unison, picking off wave after wave until the last bat crumbled and the chamber fell silent. They gathered around the remains, catching their breath and taking stock. Teamwork had carried them through, and the results spoke for themselves. Nino collected the spoils from the battlefield: bat wings, bat meat, green magic stone chunks, each item registering in his inventory as it was acquired. He surveyed the hall and confirmed they had everything they needed from this floor. That should do it. Mia slumped against a wall with visible relief, muttering that she was glad they survived. Then, she added with feeling that she was completely done with slimes, forever. The boss fight on the first floor, the disgusting earplugs, the burst water bag, every slime-related experience in this dungeon had tested her limits. Nino let her vent. Once everyone had settled, he suggested they rest briefly before heading to the next floor. As they explored the remaining corners of the boss chamber, Nino spotted something unusual on the ground. A stone, strange in color and texture, unlike anything else on this floor. His menu confirmed the find, a suspicious stone, rarity unknown. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands, wondering aloud what it was. Then the smell hit him, a sharp, pungent odor that made his nose wrinkle. Someone else noticed it too, and asked if the scent could be coming from the formations rising around them. The cave walls were covered in what looked like small stalactite mountains, rough, pale structures clustered in dense rows. Nino studied them more carefully, and the answer clicked. Those weren't stalactites. They were piles of bat guano. The entire chamber was covered in it. The group's reaction was instantaneous and unanimous. Mia recoiled in horror, screaming for them to get away as fast as possible. Paula's face tightened with restrained disgust. Even the twins looked uncertain. Everyone wanted out, but Nino didn't move. Instead, he said the opposite of what anyone wanted to hear. They were going to collect all of it. The protest was immediate. Mia demanded to know why anyone would want filthy poop stones. Nino admitted honestly that he didn't know exactly what the guano could be used for yet, but his command menu told him something crucial. The bat dung stone had a higher rarity rating than the boss slime's hide. Whatever this material turned out to be, it was valuable, potentially more valuable than anything else they had collected so far. If it could help the village, he wasn't leaving it behind. Mia stared at him with the expression of someone who had long since given up understanding her sensei's thought process. She muttered that she still didn't get what he was thinking, but Paula pointed out that the slime hide bag had seemed pointless at first too, and it had turned out to be one of the most useful things Nino had crafted. There was a precedent for trusting his instincts, even when they led to collecting monster droppings in a cave. Mia couldn't argue with that. Reluctantly, with considerable grimacing, the group helped Nino gather the guano into their remaining bags. Trust had been earned through results, and even if this particular decision made everyone's stomach turn, nobody doubted that Nino had a reason. With the second floor cleared and their inventory full, the party turned their attention downward. Each floor of the Dragon Jade Palace had its own character. Water slimes, skeleton dogs, echo bats. Whatever waited on the third would be something entirely new. Nino told the group to proceed carefully, and they moved forward together, cautious but optimistic, their dynamic tighter and sharper than it had been when they first stepped into the dungeon. The third floor was different from the moment they stepped onto it. The dry stone and bone-littered corridors of the second floor gave way to something damp and alive. Water covered the ground in shallow pools, splashing with every step the party took. The air was thick and humid, carrying a faintly organic smell that put everyone on edge. Nino noticed it first, a sound, not splashing from their own footsteps, but something else, something moving beneath the surface. He stopped, tilting his head. The others paused behind him. Then the water erupted. Something massive burst out of the ground right in front of them, a giant worm, its segmented body coiling upward as it tore free from its burrow. Nino's eyes went wide. Paula's head snapped toward the source, her mouth falling open. One of them shouted in disbelief, asking if it was a monster trap. The worm wasn't alone. More of them began emerging from holes all around the party, their thick bodies pushing through the wet earth in every direction, cutting off any clear path of retreat. Mia's composure shattered instantly. Sweat ran down her face as she called out for Nino, her voice cracking with fear. She looked around frantically, trying to figure out where the next one would come from, but they were surfacing too fast to track. The splashing intensified from all sides. She reacted on instinct. Watery orbs materialized around her body. Her water bubble spell cast defensively, forming a protective barrier against whatever was about to hit. But the worms kept coming. Mia's expression twisted with helpless anxiety as she muttered to herself, asking what she was supposed to do. She couldn't stop them. More shapes writhed beneath the surface, pushing upward, ready to break through. Something was coming out, something big, and she couldn't tell from where. Yoru stood nearby, watching the chaos unfold with an eerie calm. The little beast child, dressed in that animal-like outfit, didn't flinch. Whatever instinct the others were running on, Yoru seemed to operate on a different frequency entirely, observing the situation with quiet focus while the ground ruptured around them. Another worm exploded from the water just behind the group. Someone spun around and froze, mouth open, caught completely off guard. The third floor had announced itself with brutal clarity. No warning, no warm-up, just an ambush of burrowing monsters in a flooded cave where every step could trigger another eruption. The rules had changed. Slimes and bats were behind them. Whatever lived on this floor hunted from below, invisible until the moment it struck. The worms coiled around the party in a tightening ring, their pale, glistening bodies rising from the waterlogged ground like the fingers of something enormous reaching up from the earth itself. The chamber echoed with splashing, screeching, and the wet sound of tunnels collapsing open. Mia's water bubbles held, but barely. Paula's hand was on her weapon. Nino's mind was already racing, searching for a strategy, for any advantage the way he always did. But this time, there was no preparation, no pre-crafted countermeasure, no earplug trick to turn the tables. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and standing on the enemy's home turf. but something had changed since the ambush first hit. As the panic of those initial moments subsided, Nino noticed the floating orbs still hovering around Mia, the water bubbles she had conjured instinctively when the worms attacked. He paused, studying them. Mia herself seemed confused by their presence. She hadn't meant to cast them. They had just appeared, swirling around her body like a reflex she didn't know she had. Nino asked her what was happening. Paula leaned in, wondering aloud if it was some kind of monster attack. But as they watched the bubbles drift harmlessly around Mia, the answer became clear. This wasn't an attack. It was a spell, a new one. Water bubble, born not from a scroll or a teacher, but from the dungeon itself. Nino explained it to the group. Fighting in the labyrinth didn't just level you up. It could teach new skills directly through combat experience. The dungeon rewarded those who pushed through it, and Mia had just been rewarded with a defensive water spell she had never learned. Mia blinked in surprise, staring at the bubbles floating around her hands. She hadn't known that was possible. The discovery shifted the mood, and for a brief moment, the group relaxed, standing among the gently drifting orbs and absorbing what had just happened. The water bubbles looked soft, almost decorative, hardly intimidating, but Nino studied them with a confident smile. He could already see the potential. They were more powerful than they appeared, useful for shielding against attacks, and possibly much more. The relief didn't last. The party moved deeper into the third floor, and the environment grew worse. The cave opened into a wider chamber, riddled with holes, dark openings pockmarking the walls, floor, and ceiling. Mia eyed them nervously and voiced what everyone was thinking, asking if monsters could be hiding inside. Nino fell quiet, his expression shifting to deep concentration as he assessed the terrain. Paula scanned the shadows, her instincts flaring, and mentioned she had a bad feeling about the layout. She was right. The attack came from everywhere at once. Streams of viscous, burning liquid sprayed from the holes as giant earthworms erupted from their burrows, lunging at the party from all angles. Nino shouted a warning. The fluid was digestive acid, and it would eat through skin and armor alike. The worms were grotesque up close, their segmented bodies slick and pale, their circular mouths ringed with grinding teeth. The scale of the ambush was staggering. There wasn't just one or two. The entire chamber was infested. Chaos took hold. The party scattered, dodging acid sprays and lunging worms, their formation broken apart within seconds. Nino called for Mia to stay calm, his voice cutting through the noise. She was trying, but the overwhelming pressure was written across her face. Paula fought to hold her ground, deflecting what she could, but even she looked strained. Mia shouted through the disorder, asking what they were supposed to do. They were too scattered, too outnumbered, being picked apart from every direction. Paula echoed the frustration, calling for orders, needing Nino to tell them how to fight back. Nino looked at the worms. He looked at the holes. He looked at the acid and the chaos and the fear on his companions' faces. And then he smirked. Mia caught the expression and her eyes narrowed. She stared at him in disbelief, demanding to know why he was smiling at a time like this. But Nino's composure wasn't bravado. It was recognition. He knew these worms. He had fought them in Drakuro too, on this exact floor, in this exact kind of ambush. The panic around him was real, but so was the plan already forming behind that smirk. He had a strategy, and the group was about to find out what it was. Nino studied the largest worm rising from the ground and said something nobody expected. He declared with absolute certainty that this thing was going to be a huge catch. Mia's head whipped toward him, her voice pitching upward as she demanded to know what he meant by that. He told them he had decided. The plan wasn't to kill the worms, it was to tame one. He wanted to make it a new party member and bring it back to the village. The silence that followed lasted exactly half a second before the group's faces collectively crumbled into disbelief. Sweat drops formed, jaws hung open. Nino stood there with a confident smile, apparently convinced the villagers would love having a giant earthworm on their side. Mia snapped. She told him flatly that there was no way. He had to be joking. That gross thing? As a party member, living in the village? She was visibly distressed, her expression packed with every ounce of revulsion a person could muster at the idea of befriending a slimy tunnel worm. She wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Nino turned to Paula and asked if she could handle the taming. Paula considered it for a moment, then agreed. Her subordination skill could work on these creatures. Mia erupted again, insisting she was against it, totally and completely against it. Her frustration was impossible to miss, but even as she protested, she could see that the decision had already been made. First, though, they had to survive the ambush. The worms still surrounded them, and the digestive fluid they sprayed was a serious threat. Nino noted that in game terms, the acid would have lowered weapon or armor stats. But this wasn't a game. In reality, the fluid could dissolve equipment and burn through skin. Nobody could get close without risking permanent damage. That was when Nino turned to Mia again. He told her to use water bubble. She hesitated, confused. The spell had seemed weak earlier, barely useful against the worms directly, but Nino told her not to aim at the worms. He wanted her to fire the bubbles around the group instead, creating a defensive perimeter. Mia listened intently, her uncertainty giving way to curiosity as the strategy took shape. The plan was specific. Nino explained they needed to draw all the worms' attention to a single point, provoking them into attacking at the same time. When every worm opened its mouth to spray acid simultaneously, Mia would launch the water bubbles into the gaps, catching the acid before it reached anyone. Timing was everything. She had to fire the moment the mouths opened. Mia steadied herself. The doubt was still there, but so was determination. She raised her hands, magic swirling around her palms, and waited for Nino's signal. The worms shifted, their bodies tensing, mouths widening, as they prepared another coordinated spray. "Fire it off!" Nino shouted. Mia released everything at once. A barrage of water bubbles erupted from her hands, arcing outward in every direction, forming a shimmering wall of protective orbs around the entire party. The worms fired their acid, and the bubbles caught it. Every stream, every spray absorbed cleanly into the water barriers before it could reach anyone. The group stood untouched inside a dome of floating shields, the acid dissolving harmlessly against the bubble's surface. Nino watched with satisfaction. The defensive capability was even better than he had expected. It mirrored a game mechanic from Drakuro 2 almost perfectly. The water bubble spell, which had looked soft and decorative when Mia first learned it, had just neutralized the third floor's deadliest threat. The worms froze. They had poured everything into that attack, and nothing had gotten through. Their aggression faltered, confusion rippling through the swarm as they realized their acid was useless. One by one, they began to pull back, retreating into their burrows, withdrawing from a fight they could no longer win. The moment they turned, Nino's expression sharpened. The worms were distracted, their defenses down, their backs exposed. He gave the order. This was their chance, and the group surged forward to take it. The party charged as one. With the worms confused and retreating, the coordinated offensive hit hard and fast. Yoru and Ku darted in from the flanks, while Mia launched magical attacks from behind the bubble shield. Paula directed the assault from the center, commanding her familiars alongside the main group. The boss worm, the largest of them all, thrashed violently under the combined barrage, but with its acid neutralized and its swarm scattered, it couldn't mount a defense. The chamber shook as the final blow landed. When it was over, the group stood together in the aftermath, catching their breath. Mia let out a shaky exhale and admitted they had somehow pulled through. Nino agreed, noting it had been closer than he wanted. Someone reflected that the moment the huge worm appeared, they had genuinely thought it was over, but that creature had turned out to be the floor boss. Taking it down had cleared the third floor entirely. Mia couldn't resist the opportunity. She puffed up and announced that it was her magic that had saved the village, her water bubbles that had turned the fight around. Nino let her have the moment, though he quietly redirected the conversation to the more important point. Taming the boss worm was the real prize here. Paula stepped forward and got to work. Her subordination skill flared as she reached out to the downed creature, establishing the bond before it could fully recover. The taming took hold. The giant worm, grotesque, slimy, and roughly the size of a small building, was now theirs. Mia stared at it up close and visibly recoiled, her skin crawling at the sight of its pale, segmented body and grinding mouth just meters from her face. But Paula was beaming. She looked at the creature with genuine affection and announced its name with pride. Mi-kun. The group stared at her. Surprise and disbelief rippled across every face. Mi-kun. She had named a grotesque giant earthworm Mi-kun, like it was a pet hamster. Mi-kun promptly acted up, squirming and writhing in its new domesticated role, which only made the absurdity worse. Someone muttered about Paula's naming sense, but nobody had the energy to argue with her decisions anymore. If Paula wanted to call a tunnel-boring monster Mi-kun, then Mi-kun it was. Nino collected the spoils from the battle, yellow magic stone chunks, and slabs of giant worm meat, all registered in his inventory. Another floor's worth of valuable resources secured. With the third floor behind them, the party descended once more. The fourth floor stopped them in their tracks. Instead of the dark, wet caves and bone-strewn corridors they had grown accustomed to, they stepped into a lush, vibrant forest. Greenery stretched in every direction, towering trees, thick vines, and beams of warm light filtering through a canopy that shouldn't have existed this deep underground. The The group stood in open-mouthed awe. After the relentless grimness of the previous floors, the beauty of this place felt almost unreal. Then they saw the fairies. Tiny glowing creatures flitted between the branches, their delicate wings catching the light as they darted playfully through the air. Mia gasped with delight, calling them adorable. Even Paula softened at the sight. The fairies were clearly friendly, curious, and sociable, swooping close to investigate the newcomers before zipping away again. Nino confirmed what everyone was hoping. These weren't enemies. No combat was needed here. For a few precious minutes, the tension dissolved completely. The group watched the fairies play, laughing at their antics, enjoying a moment of pure levity in the middle of a 100-floor dungeon. It felt like a reward for everything they had survived, but the peace couldn't last. As they pushed deeper through the forest floor, the terrain shifted again, and the path led them to the inevitable, a boss room. This one required a fight, and the enemies included fairies and caterpillars guarding the passage. There was no way around it. The group's mood dampened as the reality set in. They had to fight the very creatures they had just been admiring. The battle was swift, but left a bitter taste. When it was over, the party stood among the fallen creatures, and someone offered a quiet apology to the fairies that had been caught in the conflict. The loot, white and yellow magic stone chunks, along with a caterpillar thread pouch, was gathered without the usual excitement. The fairies' reactions to the fight lingered in the air, a reminder that not every victory felt like one. Nino broke the silence. He told the group to look ahead, not back. Their goal was close now, the 5th floor. The destination he had been pushing towards since they first entered the Dragon Jade Palace was just beyond the next descent. Whatever waited down there, it was the reason they had fought through 4 floors of slimes, skeletons, bats, worms, and fairies. The group gathered their resolve and moved forward, battered but unbroken, ready for what came next. The corridor between the 4th and 5th floors was unlike anything that had come before. Massive crystals jutted from the walls, casting prismatic light across the passage in shifting colors. Nino walked at the front with his lantern, though its flame almost seemed unnecessary against the crystal's glow. Behind him, the full party followed in a line that would have looked absurd to anyone on the surface. Paula, Mia, Imochi, the caterpillar creature, Yu, the fairy, fluttering overhead, and Yoru and Ku in their animal-like outfits, bringing up the rear. A transmutation artisan, a demon tamer, a village shopkeeper turned mage, and a menagerie of tamed monsters, all walking through a glittering underground passage together. The sense of adventure was palpable. They passed towering mushrooms growing from the cave floor, their caps wide enough to stand under. Mia and Paula exchanged glances of curiosity, marveling at the alien beauty of the environment. Every step brought something new. Bioluminescent fungi, crystalline formations, the air itself humming with a faint energy that felt alive. Then the passage ended. An archway rose before them, ancient and weathered, framing something that made every member of the party freeze. Light, real, warm, golden light, pouring through the opening like sunrise. Nino stepped through first, and his breath caught. Paula and Mia followed, their expressions cracking open with disbelief. The 5th floor wasn't a floor at all. It was a world. A vast, open landscape stretched before them. Rolling terrain, rugged mountains rising in the distance, trees dotting the horizon, and a sky overhead that looked impossibly real. Clouds drifted across it, casting slow-moving shadows over grasslands that seemed to go on forever. The light came from above, warm and steady, radiating from what appeared to be a massive glowing stone embedded in the ceiling, the Sun Rock, shining like a miniature sun over an underground paradise. The group stepped out onto the open ground and stood in silence, taking it all in. After 4 floors of dark caves, wet tunnels, bone-strewn corridors, and monster ambushes, the sheer scale and beauty of this place was overwhelming. It looked like the surface. It felt like the surface. The wind moved, the light was warm, and the air tasted clean. Mia spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. She asked if they had somehow gone outside. Paula echoed the confusion, scanning the horizon for any sign of the dungeon they had been fighting through. Nothing about this place looked like it belonged 100 feet underground. Nino turned to face them. His expression was steady, but something burned behind his eyes. A fire that had been building since the moment he accepted Barnabas's transfer letter. He told them clearly that they were still inside the labyrinth. This was the 5th floor. And then he said the words he had carried in silence through every battle, every floor, every sleepless night, spent studying maps and plotting routes. This is the place that will save everyone. The weight of it settled over the group. Mia's confusion gave way to something deeper, a dawning understanding that this wasn't just another level to clear. This was the destination, the vast plain, the fertile soil, the sun rock, lighting it all like an eternal day. This was where Nino planned to build a new village, a safe haven underground, hidden from the dragon of destruction, protected by 100 floors of labyrinth above it, a place where people could live, grow food, raise families, and survive the apocalypse that was 3 years away. Everything, the transfer, the escape through the sewers, the carriage ride with Hans, the monster egg, the village, the dried river, the dungeon, it had all been leading here, to this moment, on this floor, standing in the light of a stone sun in a world beneath the world. Mia's eyes glistened. Paula stood tall beside Nino, her gaze sweeping across the landscape with the quiet certainty of someone who had chosen to follow the right person. Yoru and Ku pressed close to Nino's legs. Emochi shifted behind them. Yu circled overhead, its tiny wings catching the warm light. The adventure wasn't over. It was only beginning, but for the first time, the party could see exactly what they were fighting for. Nino stood at the edge of the cliff with the group flanking him, Yoru and Ku at his sides, Pola and Mia behind, all of them staring out across the vast fifth-floor plain. The sun rock blazed overhead, flooding the landscape with golden warmth. It was the kind of view that made impossible things feel achievable. He laid out the full plan. This place, the open terrain, the fertile soil, the natural light, the clean air, was everything they needed. He pointed toward the sweeping vista of mountains and untouched land and told them he was going to build fields here, workshops, houses, an entire village underground, shielded from whatever was coming on the surface. This was the final hope, the base from which they would protect everyone against the disaster barreling toward them. The group listened in stunned silence. Mia asked quietly if he was serious, building an entire village inside a dungeon. Nino didn't flinch. He told them the truth he had been carrying alone for too long. The surface was doomed. The dragon of destruction would fully awaken within 3 years, and when it did, everything above ground would be annihilated. The labyrinth existed because of that threat, and this floor, this hidden world beneath the earth, was the only place where people could survive what was coming. The reactions split between disbelief and determination. The scale of Nino's ambition was staggering, almost absurd, but as the words sank in, nobody laughed. The seriousness on his face, the weight he had been carrying since the capital, the way he had navigated every floor of the dungeon as if he already knew the path. It all made sense now. This had been the goal from the very beginning. Then his voice softened. A memory surfaced. Eni and Ori, the boarding house, the last meal in the underground storage, the money hidden in his bag. He admitted that he wanted to go back to the capital someday, not just for supplies or reinforcements, but for them. He wanted to bring Eni and Ori here, to this safe haven he was building. They were his family. They had given him everything, and he wasn't going to let the surface's destruction take them too. The group fell quiet. The personal weight behind the grand plan hit differently than the strategic logic. This wasn't just about saving the world in the abstract. It was about saving the people who had raised him, the faces he saw when he closed his eyes at night. As they walked back through the dungeon corridors, the mood shifted to something lighter. Mia bounced along beside Nino with a playful grin and told him she had always known he was special. She expressed faith in his abilities with the casual warmth of someone who had stopped doubting him floors ago. Her smile was genuine, free of the panic and confusion that had defined her early dungeon experience. She had grown, and she trusted him completely. Paula, walking on his other side, was quieter. Her cheeks carried a faint flush, and her expression held something deeper than admiration, a devotion that had been building in silence. Then she spoke, and her tone had changed. She addressed him not as "my dear," the way she usually did, but as something new, "my lord." The formality landed like a stone dropping into still water. Nino stopped mid-step. He turned to her, caught completely off guard, and asked what had just happened. Why the sudden shift? Paula met his gaze with an intensity that made his face heat up. She explained that his vision, the village, the safe haven, the plan to save an entire civilization inside a dungeon, had moved her beyond anything she had experienced before. She wanted to serve him with the gravity that vision deserved. She declared her dedication with the kind of resolve that left no room for negotiation. Nino stammered, his composure crumbling into flustered protest. He told her there was no need for that kind of formality, that they were a team, that she should just call him what she always had. The harder he tried to talk her down, the more firmly she held her ground. Paula's devotion was absolute, and no amount of embarrassed waving was going to change the new title. Mia watched the exchange from the side, thoroughly entertained by the sight of their fearless leader reduced to a blushing, sputtering mess by 2 words from a demon woman who had decided he was worth following into the end of the world. Nino thanked Paula for the respect behind the title, but told her honestly that he wanted her to stop. It was too much. Paula blinked, her cheeks flushing a deeper shade as she asked if she really couldn't call him that. The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. He softened and confessed that he had actually liked the way she used to address him, my dear. It had felt natural, comfortable, like something that belonged to the two of them. Paula's face lit up. She agreed immediately, her earlier intensity melting into warm happiness. She called him my dear again, and the familiarity of it settled the air between them. Nino exhaled, relieved, and admitted it just felt right. Paula let out a quiet laugh and conceded that she had gotten ahead of herself. Behind them, Mia interjected with a knowing grin and blamed the whole situation on Nino. If he hadn't given that speech about building an underground empire and saving the world, Paula wouldn't have gone full devotion mode in the first place. Mia added, still grinning, that Paula's feelings toward him had clearly deepened because of all his talk about grand dreams and saving everyone. She told him encouragingly that he had found his path, and whatever came next, they were with him. Nino accepted the words, but his thoughts were already drifting elsewhere. The smile faded as worry crept in. He thought of Eni and Ori, still in the capital, still under the watch of the Dragon Spear Holy Knights. If the Knights had figured out where he went, they might use his family to draw him out. The danger wasn't just theoretical, it was personal, and it gnawed at him with every step away from the dungeon. They emerged from the labyrinth entrance to find the sky had gone dark. Night had fallen while they were underground, and the cracked moon hung overhead like a wound in the heavens. The Dragon of Destruction's eye, partially open, staring down at a world that didn't know it was dying. Nino gazed up at it in silence, the weight of everything pressing down harder now that they were back on the surface. Time was passing. 3 years sounded like a lot until you remembered how much had to be built. Then the torches appeared. A group of figures emerged from the darkness ahead, moving fast, carrying farming tools raised like weapons, pitchforks, shovels, axes, not the gear of soldiers, but dangerous enough. Nino's blood ran cold. His first thought was the Knights. Had they sent people? Had they found the village? Before he could speak, the figures charged. The situation escalated in seconds. Paula reacted first, stepping in front of Nino with her hand raised. You, the fairy, darted forward and unleashed a burst of blinding light that froze the attackers in their tracks, their eyes squeezed shut against the flash. Yoru and Ku dropped into defensive stances, their small bodies coiled and ready to strike. The party's tamed creatures flanked them, adding to the wall of resistance. Paula's voice carried a sharp warning, making it clear that the next move would not be gentle. Then a voice cut through the chaos, a familiar one. Someone called out from among the armed figures, shouting for everyone to stop. The tension cracked. Nino recognized the voice. So did Mia. The farming tools lowered, the blinding light faded, and the attackers were revealed for what they actually were: villagers. Ute, Hamo, Yogen, and others from the starting village, armed with whatever they could grab, who had come searching for them because the party hadn't returned from the dungeon. They weren't enemies, they were worried. Confusion rippled through both sides. The villagers stared at Paula's tamed creatures, Mi-kun, Lu, Sui, Yu, and realized the monsters they had seen emerging from the dungeon entrance were allies, not threats. Nino stood in the middle of it all, his heart still hammering, caught between the relief of not being under attack and the surprise of discovering that the entire village had mobilized to come find them. The misunderstanding wasn't over yet. One of the villagers was still on the ground, frightened and confused, scrambling backward from the tamed creatures that loomed in the torchlight. Paula, not yet realizing these were friendly faces, assessed the fallen figures with a cold intensity. She considered using Mi-kun to intimidate them into talking, the giant worm coiling behind her like a living threat, its massive body casting a shadow over the cowering villagers. Then, Mia's voice cut through everything. "Bao-sama, stop!" She shouted it with urgency, recognizing the people on the ground. These weren't strangers. These were their neighbors, their friends, people from the village who had come looking for them. Paula froze mid-command, her eyes widening as recognition finally clicked. The tension shattered. Both sides stared at each other, the absurdity of the situation sinking in. The village's own search party had nearly been attacked by the people they were searching for. Back inside a building in the village, Paula was inconsolable. She pressed her forehead to the floor in a full prostration, begging for punishment. She had nearly set a giant worm on innocent villagers. The guilt was crushing her. The others tried to take the blame. They insisted it was their own fault for approaching the dungeon entrance. entrance at night with weapons raised. They should have announced themselves, but Paula wouldn't hear it. Tears streamed down her face as she repeated that she couldn't forgive herself for what she had almost done. Someone gently told her to calm down, to refocus the conversation on what mattered. Another person muttered that the whole situation was beyond strange. Gradually, the full picture emerged. Mia had been the reason the villagers came out in the first place. Ute, Mia's mother, had grown worried when her daughter didn't return from the dungeon expedition. She organized a search party, and they headed toward the river where they knew the group had gone. That was when they stumbled across the dungeon entrance near the dried riverbed, and that was when they saw the monsters. The villagers recounted what they had witnessed with wide, terrified eyes. Creatures emerging from a cave, Mikun, Lu, Sui, Yu, shapes that didn't belong in any world they understood. They had panicked, grabbed tools, and prepared for the worst. From their perspective, monsters had appeared out of nowhere near their village, and they had acted to defend their homes. One of the party members asked them what exactly they had seen in the cave, and the truth came spilling out. There was a magic energy pool under the village, a dungeon, the Dragon Jade Palace, hidden beneath the earth this entire time, breeding monsters on every floor. The revelation sent a shock through the gathering. The villagers who hadn't been on the expedition processed it with mounting dread. A dungeon, right beneath the place they had built their homes, raised their families, tended their fields for 5 long years. The reaction was immediate and emotional. Some faces went white, others hardened with anger. Voices rose, arguing about what to do. The possibility of abandoning the village surfaced like a wound torn open. People who had poured years of sweat into this frontier settlement confronted the idea that all of it might have been for nothing. The despair was raw and loud. Dirk, the village chief, raised his hand and called for restraint. His voice carried the steady authority of a man who had led through hardship before. He urged everyone not to make any rash decisions. They needed to report this to higher authorities, gather information, and act with clarity rather than panic. His words calmed the room, but only partially. The fear was still there, heavy and unresolved. Not everyone was willing to wait. One villager turned their frustration toward Nino, the outsider who had brought this discovery to light. Bitterness edged their voice as they pointed out that years of hard work building this village might now be worthless. And it was Nino who had uncovered the threat sitting right beneath their feet. The accusation stung, not because it was unfair, but because it was understandable. Nino stayed quiet through all of it. He didn't defend himself, didn't argue, didn't try to steer the conversation. He just listened, watching the emotional unrest ripple through the people he had come here to save. He understood their fear, he understood their anger, and he knew that what he had to offer them, the truth about the dungeon, the plan for the 5th floor, the 3-year countdown, would either unite this village or tear it apart. But this wasn't the moment to push, so he sat with their pain, absorbing it, and waited for the right time to speak. As the room argued and the fear spread, Nino's mind was somewhere else entirely. He was running the numbers, not out loud, not on paper, but inside his head, through the lens of a game he had memorized in another life. In Drakuro 2, villages had happiness levels. It was a hidden mechanic that tracked how the people felt, their security, their prosperity, their hope. When happiness dropped too low, the story locked into the bad ending route. The dragon of destruction would awaken, and nothing could stop it. Everything hinged on keeping those levels stable. This was bad. If the village was abandoned now, happiness would crash to zero. The chain of events that followed, the collapse, the exodus, the loss of the settlement that anchored this region, would push the world one step closer to the ending Nino had spent his entire second life trying to prevent. He muttered it under his breath. This was bad. His thoughts spiraled into the future he was fighting to avoid. He saw it clearly, the landscape scorched and dead, skeletons littering the ground, the sky choked with ash, the calamity descending on everything he cared about. If the village fell, if the people scattered, if the dungeon went unexplored and the 5th floor went unbuilt, then the safe haven would never exist. And if the safe haven never existed, then everyone, the villagers, the people of the capital, Eni and Ori, would be consumed by the destruction he already knew was coming. He thought of Eni's face, Ori's embrace, the money they had hidden in his bag, the sandwich that had tasted so good he cried. If the village died here tonight, in this room, through fear and panic, then everything he had sacrificed to reach this place would have been for nothing, and his family in the capital would have no one coming to save them. Nino stood up. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to him. The outsider, the alchemist, the man some of them had just blamed for bringing disaster to their doorstep. He looked across the gathered faces and said 2 words that cut through the noise. Please wait. The authority in his voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The argument stopped. The anger paused. Mia watched him from the side, murmuring his name, Sensei, as if confirming to herself that this was the moment she had been waiting for. Nino addressed the entire room. He told them the truth, not all of it, not the dragon of destruction, not the 3-year countdown, but the part that mattered right now. The reason we entered that magic energy pool was to save this village. The words hung in the silence. He explained that the dungeon wasn't just a source of danger. It held resources, clean water, rare materials, fertile land that could transform the village's future. They hadn't stumbled into it by accident. They had gone in with a plan, and they had found exactly what they were looking for. Inside his head, the resolve crystallized. He thought of his family in the royal capital. He thought of every person in this room, and he made a vow to himself that was fiercer than anything he had spoken aloud. He would convince every single person in this village, no matter what it took. Not through force, not through deception, but through results. He would show them what the dungeon could give them. He would prove that staying was the right choice. He would build the future he had promised on the 5th floor, and he would drag this village out of despair by his own hands if he had to. The reactions across the room were mixed. Dirk's expression shifted from cautious authority to genuine consideration. Haimo folded his arms, skeptical but listening. Yugen raised an eyebrow, his old drunk's instinct sensing something real beneath the words. Ute watched Nino with the careful gaze of a mother, measuring whether this man could be trusted with her daughter's safety. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed doubt. A few showed something that hadn't been in the room 5 minutes ago. Hope. It was fragile, uncertain, and far from unanimous, but it was there. And for Nino, that was enough to build on. Words alone wouldn't be enough. Nino knew that, so he showed them. Mia stood beside him with a smile as he held up a cluster of crystals, brilliant, shimmering stones pulled from the depths of the Dragon Jade Palace. The sight grabbed the room's attention immediately. Nino stepped forward and addressed the villagers directly, his tone no longer defensive, but purposeful. He told them he wanted to save this village, and that the underground labyrinth beneath their feet wasn't a curse. It was an unbelievable treasure trove. The villagers exchanged confused glances. Some asked what he meant by saving the village. Others narrowed their eyes, still skeptical. Nino didn't flinch. He gestured toward the items he had brought back and invited everyone to look for themselves. He laid the materials out, crystals, magic stones, dungeon resources, and the reactions started instantly. One villager picked up a crystal and froze, his voice catching as he recognized what he was holding. The quality, the clarity, it was unmistakable. Another villager pointed at additional items with growing disbelief, the realization spreading through the crowd like a wave. Nino watched their faces change and thought to himself that Hans would have understood immediately. The merchant knew value when he saw it, and these items would have made his jaw drop. Mia nudged one of the villagers, a relative of hers, and teased him about how wide his eyes had gotten. The playful remark cut through the tension just enough to let people breathe. Then came the white luminous stones. A woman picked one up and asked hesitantly what it was worth. One of the villagers who knew trade answered without hesitation. Just one of those stones was worth 50 gold coins. 50 for a single stone. In a frontier village where every coin was counted and fought for, that number landed like a thunderclap. Nino held a leather pouch full of them with a quiet smile, letting the implications settle on their own. The dungeon wasn't just dangerous, it was rich beyond anything this village had ever imagined. But Nino wasn't finished. He produced large flasks and offered them to the gathering, telling everyone he wanted them to have what was inside. The villagers accepted cautiously. One man took a sip, and his eyes flew wide. A surge of energy flooded through his body, warmth and vitality spreading from his chest to his fingertips. He stared at the flask in disbelief. The others followed, tasting the labyrinth water for the first time. Stunned reactions erupted across the room. Astonishment, wonder, gratitude. The water was unlike anything they had ever consumed. Pure, potent, almost magical in its effect. The mood in the room transformed. What had been fear and despair just minutes ago was rapidly becoming excitement and possibility. Nino explained that the labyrinth contained materials that could be transmuted into daily necessities, tools, supplies, medicines. The village wouldn't just survive, it could thrive, powered by the resources sitting right beneath their homes. One villager raised the obvious question: how had Nino managed to navigate a dungeon full of monsters in the first place? He hadn't arrived with an army. He was a transmutation artisan, a handyman by his own admission. The doubt was fair. Dungeon monsters killed people. How had he survived? Nino smiled and told them simply that he'd had some dependable allies with him. He gestured behind him, and the party stepped into view. Paula with her composed elegance, Yoru and Ku at her sides, and Mia front and center. Mia seized the moment. She planted her feet, threw her shoulders back, and announced herself as an exceptionally talented mage. The pose was dramatic, the confidence absolute, and the delivery so over the top that it sucked the gravity right out of the room. Paula immediately remarked that Mia could barely light a fire on her best day. The others piled on with playful jabs, cutting Mia's grand declaration down to size while she sputtered in protest. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the kind that only came from people who had fought side by side and earned the right to roast each other. The villagers watched the exchange with loosening expressions, the fear in the room fading further with every laugh. Someone in the crowd told Mia her joke had gone far enough, but Mia wasn't joking. She was just getting started. She straightened up with renewed confidence and told the villagers she had become a whole new person. She could defeat monsters instantly now. To prove it, she struck a dramatic pose and declared herself a great mage while channeling her magic. A swirling vortex of wind materialized around her, whipping through the room with genuine force. The crowd gasped. One of the bystanders laughed and suggested she try aiming at something a little closer, mocking the spectacle even as the wind picked up. Mia scanned the reactions around her and frowned. The response wasn't big enough for her liking. She decided to try again, harder this time, and that was where things went wrong. The magic surged beyond her control, the wind ripping outward with destructive force, scattering objects and sending villagers stumbling backward in panic. Chairs toppled, cups shattered, and someone shouted for her to stop. But Mia, carried away by the excitement of showing off, didn't hear the warning until the damage was done. The silence that followed was deafening. Ute stepped forward, and the look on her face would have stopped a charging bull. She told Mia in a voice that left zero room for interpretation that if she pulled one more stunt like that, she would be expelled from the village. Her own mother, issuing the threat with the cold certainty of a woman who meant every syllable. Mia crumbled. The bravado vanished, replaced by tears and a frantic apology as she bowed and begged for forgiveness. Once the chaos settled, a villager who had watched the whole display approached with a different kind of expression. Not anger, but genuine curiosity. Mia's power had been real, even if her control was terrible. The villager asked how she had gotten that strong. She was a shopkeeper's daughter, not a warrior. Where had this ability come from? Nino stepped in and explained. The enhancement was the result of transmutation, potions he had crafted from dungeon materials that could boost a person's magical potential. What Mia had just demonstrated, destructive as it was, proved that ordinary villagers could gain real combat abilities through alchemy. The implication hit the crowd fast. If Mia, clumsy, reckless, never fought a monster in her life, Mia could become a mage capable of generating windstorms, then others could too. The villagers wouldn't have to cower from the dungeon. They could explore it, fight in it, harvest its resources. The excitement rippled through the room, voices rising with possibility and ambition. But Chief Dirk's voice cut through all of it. He said no. The room went still. Dirk stood with his arms folded, the horn on his forehead, catching the lamplight beneath the brim of his straw hat. His expression was iron. He told them he could not approve sending villagers into that labyrinth. Safety came first, always. No treasure, no resource, no amount of gold was worth risking lives. The weight of his refusal settled over the gathering, and nobody challenged it, because nobody could. Dirk carried a history that gave his words a gravity no argument could overcome. He shared it quietly, his voice dropping to something heavier than authority. Monsters had attacked his family in the past. His daughter had disappeared during one such attack, taken, lost, never found. His grandchild still carried the scars of that day, afflicted by a lasting illness from the encounter. The memory was etched into every line on his face. He had lived through the worst that monsters could do, and he was not going to let it happen again, not to anyone in his village. The room was silent. Nino listened to every word, and he didn't push back. He couldn't. Dirk's reasons weren't born from stubbornness or ignorance. They came from a place of genuine loss, the kind of pain that shaped a person's entire worldview. A father who had lost his daughter to the very things Nino was asking him to embrace. But Nino's resolve didn't waver either. He respected Dirk's position. He understood the fear and the grief behind it, and he knew that pushing harder right now would only harden the resistance. This would have to be won slowly, through trust and proof, the same way he had won over Mia and Paula, one step at a time. He stood among his allies, Paula at his side, Mia wiping her tear-streaked face, Yoru and Ku watching from behind, and let his thoughts settle on what came next. The dungeon was real, the resources were real, the potential was real. All he needed was time and the right moment to show Dirk that the labyrinth could protect his people, not destroy them. Dirk's face held firm, but something in his eyes suggested the decision wasn't final. Not yet. The chief was thinking, weighing, measuring the cost of every possible path, and Nino could see it, the faintest crack in that iron resolve, where a critical decision was beginning to take shape. Nino made his move the only way that could work. He didn't argue with Dirk's refusal. He didn't try to debate the trauma or minimize the danger. Instead, he smiled and invited the chief to come into the labyrinth himself, see it with his own eyes, walk the floors, face the monsters, and judge for himself whether the dungeon was a death sentence or a lifeline. The room erupted. Several villagers voiced immediate alarm. Was Nino trying to get the chief killed? The horn-headed old man had just told them about losing his daughter to monsters, and now this outsider wanted to drag him underground? The concern was loud and genuine, but Paula stepped forward and supported the idea. She argued calmly that it would be better for the chief to witness the truth firsthand rather than make a decision based on fear alone. If Dirk saw what they had seen, he could judge with clarity. Dirk listened to both sides. He looked at Nino, then at Paula, then at the nervous faces around him, and then he agreed. He would go. He would see for himself what lay beneath his village, and he would make his decision after. They gathered at the dungeon entrance, the same root-choked opening near the dried riverbed. Nino handed Dirk a weapon before they descended, a bone spear, crafted from skeleton dog bones, harvested on the second floor. Dirk took it and examined the weapon with a mix of apprehension and grim readiness. He asked if he was actually expected to fight. The group reassured him with a mix of encouragement and humor. Someone commented that he looked pretty formidable with a spear in his hand, straw hat and all. Then Hans appeared. The merchant strolled up to the dungeon entrance with a slightly embarrassed laugh, explaining that he couldn't stay away once he heard about the luminous stones. The lure of 50 gold coin gems had drawn him in faster than any sense of caution could hold him back. The others exchanged knowing looks and remarked on how smoothly he had inserted himself into the party. Apparently, running toward profit was a family trait. Hans just grinned. They descended into the first floor. The crystals along the walls lit the way, and the familiar damp air of the labyrinth settled over them. It didn't take long before the slimes appeared, translucent, pulsing, their fanged mouths splitting open as they sensed the group's magic. The party was ready. Paula struck first, her whip cracking through the air and slicing into the nearest slime with practiced precision. Nino called out to Dirk, encouraging him to engage. The chief hesitated for only a second before planting his feet and driving the bone spear forward. The impact was solid. The spear punched clean through the slime's body, and the creature burst apart. Dirk stared at the remains, visibly stunned that it had been that easy. The pressure was real, but his body had responded, and the monster was dead at his feet. The rest of the slimes fell just as quickly. The party moved through them with a coordination that felt almost casual compared to the desperate first-floor battle they had fought days earlier. Nino commented on the difference. What had nearly killed them on their first attempt was now barely a challenge. Everyone had leveled up. Their stats, their skills, their instincts. The growth was undeniable. Dirk lowered his spear and looked around the cleared chamber, processing what had just happened. He had expected something far worse. The monsters were dangerous, yes, but they were manageable. With the right preparation, the right weapons, and the right people, the labyrinth wasn't the death trap he had imagined. Nino watched the chief's expression shift and felt the persuasion working exactly as he had planned. This wasn't an argument, it was a demonstration. Before they could settle, more slimes emerged from the walls and floor. The monsters respawned quickly on this level, filling the corridors almost as fast as they were cleared. But instead of retreating, the group tightened up and pushed forward. Dirk gripped his spear with fresh resolve. The children flanked Paula, and Hans stayed close to Nino. A larger slime loomed ahead, blocking the passage. Bigger than the rest, its mass swelling as it prepared to attack. Nobody flinched. The party moved toward it as one, their confidence earned through every floor they had already conquered. And Dirk, the cautious chief who had refused to let his village anywhere near this place, marched among them with a weapon in his hand and a decision forming behind his eyes. The second floor fell just as easily as the first. The skeleton dogs lunged and shattered under coordinated strikes. The echo bats dove and were swatted aside before their screeches could land. The party moved through it all with a rhythm that made the dungeon feel almost routine. When the last creature crumbled, they gathered together in the cleared corridor, and someone remarked that they had cleared the second floor with ease too. The sense of accomplishment was collective. Even Dirk, who had entered the labyrinth ready for the worst, stood among them with an expression that no longer resembled dread. Hans crouched over the monster remains, his merchant instincts fully taking over. He scooped up a cluster of magic stones and materials that the creatures had dropped, turning them over in his hands with barely contained excitement. He commented with a grin that once you got used to it, this was a breeze. The confidence on his face was genuine. The fear had been replaced entirely by the thrill of discovery and the promise of profit. Someone noticed the similarity between Hans and Dirk, a shared mannerism, a familiar look in their eyes when they were sizing something up. The observation drew an amused agreement from the group. Yeah, they were definitely alike. The family resemblance ran deeper than appearances. Hans held up the materials for Dirk to see, his voice climbing with disbelief. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Monsters dropped this much material, and magic stones just from being defeated. Every fight was an economic windfall. Every cleared floor was a harvest. The labyrinth wasn't just a dungeon. For a merchant's eyes, it was a bottomless mine of resources waiting to be tapped. Dirk watched Hans's excitement and said nothing for a long moment. Then his voice came, quieter than the enthusiasm around him. He murmured that he understood, but something still held him back. The doubt wasn't gone. It had weakened, cracked under the weight of everything he had witnessed today, but it was still there, anchored to memories that no amount of magic stones could erase. Hans wasn't having it. He turned to the chief with a directness that caught everyone's attention and insisted they couldn't abandon a place this profitable. His voice carried the urgency of a man who saw a future for the village that went far beyond survival, a future of prosperity, of trade, of growth. He was practically begging Dirk to see it the same way. The corridor fell quiet. All eyes turned to the chief. Nino stepped forward and asked the question that everything had been building toward. He kept his voice level, respectful, giving the moment the weight it deserved. "Well, chief, what's your impression of the labyrinth?" Dirk stood still. The bone spear rested in his grip, the weapon he had used to kill his first monster just hours ago. The horn on his forehead caught the crystal light. His straw hat cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much loss and were now being asked to believe in something new. He looked at the magic stones in Hans's hands. He looked at the walls of the dungeon that had terrified his village into near abandonment. He looked at Nino, the outsider who had arrived on a merchant's carriage with nothing but a transfer letter and a plan that sounded insane. And he thought about his daughter, about his grandchild, about every person in his village who had poured 5 years of their lives into a settlement on the edge of the kingdom, only to learn that a labyrinth full of monsters had been sitting beneath their feet the entire time. The silence stretched. Nobody pushed. Nobody filled it with argument or persuasion. They simply waited for the man who carried the village on his shoulders to decide which direction they would walk. Dirk's grip tightened on the spear, his jaw set, and in his eyes, the last remnants of refusal gave way to something harder. Not recklessness, not surrender, but the resolve of a leader who had weighed every cost and chosen to move forward. The answer was forming on his lips, and everyone in that corridor could feel it. Whatever words came next would shape the future of the starting village and every soul living in it. Before Dirk gave his answer, the dungeon offered one more piece of evidence. Paula sat on a rocky outcrop near the labyrinth's rest area, her demonic tail curled lazily at her side. Yoru and Ku had fallen asleep at her feet, their small bodies nestled against each other, still dressed in their animal-like outfits. The scene was quiet, almost domestic. A demon woman watching over 2 sleeping children in the depths of a monster-infested labyrinth, looking as serene and content as if she were sitting in a sunlit garden. Nature grew around them, soft and green, fed by the dungeon's own energy. Dirk took it in. He stood with his staff, the horns on his forehead catching the crystal light, and reflected aloud on what he had experienced. The labyrinth's threat had been less daunting than he anticipated. The monsters were real, but they were beatable. His own hands had proven that. Still, he hesitated. The unknown nature of deeper floors, the creatures that might lurk beyond what they had seen. It was the uncertainty that held him, not the danger they had already faced. That was when Nino spoke up. He told Dirk there was something else he needed to see, a special place, something that would put everything into perspective. They descended together, through the 3rd floor, past the 4th, down into the passage lined with massive crystals, and then they stepped through the archway onto the 5th floor. Dirk froze. The landscape that opened before him was vast, vivid, and impossible. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon beneath a warm golden light cast by the sun rock overhead. Mountains rose in the distance. Trees stood in clusters across untouched terrain. The air was clean, the wind was real, and the space seemed to go on forever. The chief's mouth fell open. He managed a stunned whisper, something between disbelief and awe, as his eyes swept across the open land. No walls, no ceiling he could see, and not a single owner to any of it. Nino stood beside him and let the view do the talking. Then, he asked the question that mattered most to a man who had spent his life working the earth. What did Dirk think of the soil? The old chief bent down. He scooped a handful of dirt from the ground and squeezed it between his fingers, testing the texture, the weight, the moisture. His expression shifted, no longer stunned, but focused, reading the earth the way only a lifelong farmer could. He said the soil was good, not too heavy, not too light, the kind of ground that would grow almost anything. Nino laid out his full vision. He told Dirk he wanted to move the entire village down here, not just an outpost or a temporary camp. Everything. Workshops, houses, fields, gardens. A complete settlement on the 5th floor, powered by the dungeon's resources and protected by 100 floors of labyrinth above it. Dirk and the others stared at him, the scale of the proposal hitting them like a physical force. Nino pushed further, suggesting they start with a herb garden, leveraging the fertile soil to grow medicinal plants and alchemical ingredients. The mountains in the distance, the open terrain, the sun rock's eternal daylight. It was all here, waiting. Dirk stood in silence, the handful of soil still in his palm. He looked at the mountains. He looked at the fields that didn't exist yet, but could. He looked at Nino, the transmutation artisan from the capital, who had walked into his village a week ago and was now proposing to rebuild civilization underground. The next day, Dirk gathered the entire village. The crowd packed into the tavern, curiosity and anxiety competing on every face. Word had spread that the chief and Nino had gone into the labyrinth together, and everyone wanted to know what had happened. Dirk stood before them, his staff in hand, his straw hat casting its familiar shadow. The room fell silent. He told them about the dungeon, about the monsters, the resources, the magic stones. He told them the labyrinth was dangerous but manageable. He told them about the 5th floor, the open land, the fertile soil, the sun rock. And then he told them his decision. He would not report the dungeon to the Lord. The shock rippled through the crowd like a wave. Keeping a dungeon secret from the ruling authority was not a small choice. It meant the village would develop the labyrinth on its own, without oversight, without protection from the crown, and without sharing its resources. It was a gamble of enormous proportions, and Dirk was making it with the weight of every villager's future on his shoulders. He acknowledged that the monster threat would not disappear. The labyrinth was real, the dangers were real, and caution would remain the foundation of every decision. But the opportunities were equally real. Resources, water, land, prosperity the village had never dreamed of. The faces before him shifted from shock to something more complex. Surprise mixed with intrigue, fear mixed with excitement, doubt mixed with the first fragile stirrings of belief that maybe, just maybe, the labyrinth beneath their feet was not the end of their village, but the beginning of something far greater. The doubt in the room lasted about 3 seconds. Then the first voice broke through. A young man standing near the front, his fist already raised, declaring that they would follow Nino's lead. An older man beside him nodded firmly, echoing the commitment. The village was going to grow, and they were going to be part of it. The dam broke. The entire tavern erupted in cheers, fists pumping into the air, voices overlapping in a wave of relief and excitement that shook the walls. They didn't have to abandon the village. After months of drought, after the terror of learning about the dungeon, after staring down the possibility of losing everything, they could stay. The joy was overwhelming, raw, and loud. People shouted and laughed and grabbed each other's shoulders, the kind of celebration that only came from narrowly escaping despair. More voices joined, pledging themselves to the cause. One villager shouted that he would protect the village with his own hands. Another declared she would fight too. A third, trembling with excitement, admitted this whole thing had him fired up in a way he hadn't felt in years. Fists rose together, a village united behind a decision that would have been unthinkable just days ago. Someone suggested toasting with labyrinth water. The flasks were passed around, and people drank deeply, savoring the clean, potent water from the dungeon. A concerned voice piped up, asking what would happen when it ran out, but someone else waved the worry away. They could just go gather more. The confidence was infectious. The labyrinth wasn't a sealed vault. It was a well that could be drawn from again and again. At the back of the room, Dirk watched the celebration with quiet eyes. The old chief observed his people, truly alive for the first time in longer than he could remember. The drought had drained more than their water. It had drained their spirit. And now, in the span of a single announcement, that spirit had come roaring back. He turned to Nino in a quieter moment, away from the noise, and told him something that carried the weight of everything he had seen. This was the first time he had ever witnessed his villagers so full of life. Then, with the gravity of a man entrusting something irreplaceable, he asked Nino to take care of the village. Nino met his gaze and answered without hesitation. Yes, of course, village chief. The words were simple, but they sealed something between the two men that went beyond formality. Dirk was handing over the village's future, and Nino was accepting the responsibility with everything he had. The celebration gave way to planning. The group gathered around a table, Nino, Dirk, Hans, and the core party, and laid out the immediate challenges: food, finances, medicine. The labyrinth offered incredible resources, but they couldn't survive on magic stones and bat wings alone. The village needed practical solutions, and it needed them fast. Dirk held a water jug and pointed out that simply gathering labyrinth water wouldn't be sustainable for the entire village's daily needs. They needed a real water source on the surface. Nino told him that was already handled. Before anyone could ask what he meant, a villager burst through the tavern door, breathless and alarmed, shouting about something happening outside. The group rushed out and stopped dead. Water was shooting into the sky. A massive geyser erupted from the earth near the old riverbed, spraying high above the rooftops, the force of it shaking the ground beneath their feet. The villagers gathered around, wide-eyed and dumbstruck, demanding to know what had just happened. In the middle of it all, Nino stood with a subtle grin on his face. He had known this was coming. Mi-kun, Paula's tamed giant earthworm, had been burrowing beneath the village on Nino's instructions, digging toward traces of an old neglected well he had spotted earlier. The worm's massive body had torn through the earth and hit an underground aquifer, releasing the water in a spectacular eruption. The villagers stared as the geyser settled into a steady flow, muddy brown water pooling at the surface. That was when Paula stepped forward with her blue slimes. She directed Lu and Sui into the murky water, and the familiars went to work. The slimes acted as living filters, consuming the sediment and impurities as they moved through the pool. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the muddy water began to clear, visibly, right before their eyes, turning from brown to translucent to crystal clear. Someone pointed and shouted that the water was purifying itself. Others crowded closer, unable to believe what they were seeing. Within minutes, the village had a functioning well, producing clean water, not labyrinth water from deep underground, but surface water drawn from an aquifer and purified by tamed monsters. Nino looked at the clear water filling the well basin and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had noticed the traces of the old well on his first day in the village, filed the information away, and waited until he had the right tools to act on it. Mi-kun for the digging, the slimes for the purification. The dungeon had given them everything they needed to solve the drought from above ground. He told the others they should be set for water for a while. The villagers' trust in Nino crystallized in that moment. This wasn't a promise anymore. It was proof, standing right in front of them, flowing clean and cold from the earth. They were already talking about building a proper stone well around the source, making it permanent. Paula caught Nino's eye as the crowd buzzed around the new well. Her expression carried something quieter than celebration, a look that said there was still something else that needed attention, another matter, unresolved, waiting for its moment. Nino noticed it and nodded slightly, understanding that the work was far from over. Someone asked Nino how he had figured out that Mi-kun could dig wells in the first place. He smiled and explained it simply. Back on the third floor, when the giant worms had ambushed them from every direction, he had watched them bore through solid rock and earth like it was nothing. A cave full of holes, each one carved by a creature that could dig where no human ever could. The connection had clicked right then. If a worm could tunnel through a dungeon floor, it could tunnel through surface soil to reach an aquifer. Mia listened to the explanation and went quiet. A look of guilt crossed her face. She had been the loudest voice calling Mi-kun gross, screaming about it, running from it, refusing to acknowledge it as anything other than a disgusting monster. And now that same creature had just saved the village's water supply. She admitted, looking genuinely upset with herself, that she felt terrible for judging Mi-kun so harshly. Then Mi-kun appeared from around the corner, its pale, segmented body glistening, its circular mouth grinding idly. Paula stood beside it proudly. Mia took one look at the worm up close and immediately recoiled with exaggerated distress, flailing backward despite everything she had just said. She respected its abilities. Truly, she did. But the appearance was still more than she could handle. Some things, apparently, required more than gratitude to overcome. With the well completed and the water crisis resolved, Nino headed to Yute's tavern with the group in tow. He greeted Yute and asked if he could borrow the kitchen. He had something special in mind, a meal for the village, made from ingredients nobody would expect. The group settled into the kitchen, and Nino laid out his plan. He was going to cook something unique. When they asked what, he pulled out the ingredient with a casualness that belied how horrifying it was. Giant worm meat, harvested from the dungeon, sitting on the cutting board in thick, pale slabs. The room went still. Then, the protest began. Mia looked like she might be sick. Even Ute seemed uncertain. Nino waved off the objections and started chopping. He assured everyone the meat was delicious and surprisingly versatile, rich in protein, easy to season, and far better tasting than it looked. One of them exclaimed in disbelief, unable to reconcile the grotesque source with the promise of a good meal. Yoru and Ku appeared at Nino's side, eager to help. The twin familiars rolled the ground meat into patties with their small hands, their enthusiasm making the process look almost fun. Nino took the formed patties and dropped them into a hot pan, the sizzle and aroma filling the kitchen immediately. He cooked them with practiced confidence, building the dish layer by layer. Seared meat, fresh tomatoes, a simple garnish. The final product sat on the plate with unexpected elegance. Worm meat Hamburg steak, golden brown and steaming, looking nothing like the monster it had come from. The others stared at the dish with deep skepticism. It looked good, they admitted, but they knew what was in it. Nino insisted it was top tier and pushed the plates forward. One brave soul, cautiously, reluctantly, took a bite. The reaction was immediate. Their eyes went wide. The flavor was rich, savory, and far better than anything the village had produced in months. The skepticism evaporated on the spot. The word spread down the table. It was actually delicious. Paula, who had been watching with quiet curiosity, leaned forward and asked Nino if she could try some. Her expression was mild, almost shy, which caught him off guard. He hesitated for a moment, not sure what to make of her tone, then handed her a plate. She took her first bite and froze. Her eyes widened. She chewed slowly, savoring the flavor, and something in her composure softened completely. She took another bite, and then another, each one drawing more visible enjoyment than the last. She told Nino it was the best thing she had ever eaten. The words came out with genuine emotion, not her usual elegant restraint. She kept eating, practically glowing with satisfaction, praising every aspect of the dish between bites. Nino watched her in genuine amazement. He had expected her to be polite about it, maybe appreciative. Instead, Paula, the composed, elegant demon woman from the Dunkelheit magic empire, who treated everything with measured grace, was savoring worm meat like it was a gourmet feast. He stood there, puzzled, but deeply pleased as she finished every last bite on her plate and looked up at him with an expression that said she would happily eat this every day for the rest of her life. The kitchen door swung open and Hamo burst in, his broad frame filling the doorway. He had caught the smell from halfway across the village. He called out to Nino with the energy of a man who hadn't eaten in days, demanding to know what was cooking. Nino, still riding the high of Paula's reaction, told him happily that he was glad the aroma had reached him. Hamo didn't wait for an invitation. He marched straight to the table, grabbed one of the Hamburg steaks, and bit into it. The room watched. Haimo's chewing slowed. His eyes widened. He described the texture as rich and smooth, the flavor unlike anything he had tasted before. The praise came out with the honest bluntness of a blacksmith who didn't know how to sugarcoat anything. It was good, really good. That was all the endorsement the others needed. The floodgates opened. Everyone crowded the table at once, hands reaching for plates, voices overlapping with demands for their share. One person shouted to give them one too. Another fought for position. The Hamburg steaks disappeared as fast as Nino could plate them. Nino grinned through the chaos and announced that sautéed bat meat would be added to the menu next. The crowd cheered, any lingering squeamishness about dungeon ingredients obliterated by the taste of what was already in their mouths. As the tavern filled with people eating, laughing, and talking louder than they had in months, Nino felt something shift, not in the room, but deeper. In the back of his mind, the game mechanic he had been tracking flickered to life. He saw it clearly. The balance of the scales, the happiness meter from Drakuro 2, had leveled out more than before. The ornate structure with its weighted scales, an image only he could see, showed a measurable change. The village's happiness level was climbing. He observed the scene around him. Villagers who had been arguing about abandoning their homes 2 days ago were now sharing monster meat at a communal table, praising the food, making plans for the future. The laughter was real, the hope was real, and the scales reflected it. Nino noted it quietly to himself, so the happiness level had increased. That was one step forward, one small push away from the bad ending route, one increment closer to a future where the dragon of destruction could be stopped. The feast continued late into the evening, the tavern alive with warmth and noise and community in a way it hadn't been since before the drought. Every plate of food, every sip of labyrinth water, every joke and story shared across the table added another layer to the foundation Nino was building. Not just a village, a people who believed they had a future worth fighting for. The next morning, Nino walked into the tavern and stopped in his tracks. The place was packed, every seat taken, every wall lined with bodies, the crowd spilling out through the door. Villagers of all ages, farmers, craftsmen, mothers, elders, crammed into the building shoulder to shoulder, all of them awake and assembled at an hour that should have been too early for anyone. Nino stood in the doorway, bewildered, and asked what was going on. The answer came from every direction at once. They wanted in, all of them. They wanted to go to the labyrinth. Voices overlapped in a wall of noise. Someone arguing they had arrived first, another insisting they had gotten there earlier, a third pushing forward claiming their spot. The clamor was deafening. Everyone was shouting the same thing. Take us into the labyrinth right now. Nino stared at the mob of volunteers and stammered that they couldn't all go at once. But the crowd only pressed closer, more voices piling on, more hands raised, more people insisting they be included in the next expedition. The village that had nearly collapsed from fear of the dungeon was now fighting for the right to enter it. He stood there, overwhelmed, surrounded by the very people he had spent the past week convincing, every one of them now more eager than he could handle. The enthusiasm had outrun his planning by a mile, and the sheer chaos of it, the shouting, the shoving, the sunrise mob of would-be dungeon explorers, was the most absurd and hopeful thing Nino had seen since arriving at the starting village. The question of what to do with all of them hit him like a wall, but as the noise washed over him and the faces pressed in from every side, the problem brought a smile to his face. This was a good problem to have. Nino needed a system. He couldn't take the entire village into the labyrinth at once. That was a recipe for disaster. Safety required small groups, and small groups required selection. Mia led the way as the preparations began, walking down a winding path toward the dungeon entrance with her lantern held high. Yoru and Ku trotting beside her. Behind them, the mob of eager villagers followed, each one convinced they were the perfect candidate. A muscular man flexed and boasted about how many monsters he could take down barehanded. Another villager claimed expertise with a bow, promising precision from range. A third mentioned past training as a swordsman, his hand resting on an imaginary hilt. The determination was real across the board, even if the qualifications varied wildly. Nino watched the parade of self-promotion and felt the familiar pressure of having more enthusiasm than he could safely channel. He told them the limit, 3 people. That was all he could take into the labyrinth at a time without compromising safety. The crowd's energy deflated instantly, surprise and disappointment sweeping across faces that had been so eager just seconds ago. 3 out of dozens. The selection would have to be merit-based. Nino set up the first test. He placed a white stone lamp on a table and instructed every candidate to try lighting it with their willpower. The lamp reacted to magic potential. If it glowed, the person had latent abilities worth developing. Those who couldn't produce a response would move to the second test, mock battles using wooden swords, testing physical combat aptitude instead. Hans stepped forward as the opponent for the mock battles, and what followed surprised everyone. The merchant moved with a fluidity and precision that had no business belonging to a man who drove a carriage for a living. His wooden sword found openings that trained fighters missed. His footwork was clean, and his timing was sharp. The spectators watched with wide eyes, impressed despite themselves. Nino observed quietly and noted that Hans wasn't just bluffing. When asked, Hans explained it casually. Years of trade runs through dangerous territory had forced him to learn how to fight. Survival was good motivation. Paula handled the final phase of testing. She brought out her full roster of tamed creatures, Lu and Sui, Mikun looming in the background, and other dungeon-tamed beasts, and used them to evaluate how the recruits handled pressure from real monsters under controlled conditions. Her commanding presence and the sheer variety of creatures at her disposal drew gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Some candidates thrived under the pressure, others crumbled. When the trials concluded, Nino announced the 3 who had earned their spots. Johann, a swordsman with sharp instincts and steady nerves. Simon, a warrior whose raw physical strength had carried him through every test. And Leona, a mage whose magic aptitude had lit the stone lamp brighter than anyone expected. The 3 reacted with excitement and gratitude. Their chance to enter the labyrinth had been earned, and they knew it. The rest of the crowd sagged with disappointment, some voicing their disbelief at being passed over. Then came Haimo. The beastman blacksmith pushed through the rejected crowd with tears streaming down his face, his massive frame shaking with emotion. He protested loudly, insisting he deserved a spot. Back home, he told them, he was known as Haimo the Slime Killer. The title came out with such passionate sincerity that it was impossible to tell whether it was a genuine reputation or something he had made up on the spot. Johann made a light-hearted crack about leaving Haimo behind, and the others laughed, which only deepened the blacksmith's despair. The comedy of a hulking beastman weeping over not being chosen for a dungeon run softened the tension of the selection, even as Haimo's genuine disappointment made it clear how much the labyrinth had come to mean to the village. The chosen group descended together, pushing through the familiar floors until they emerged onto the fifth. The vast mountainous landscape of the underground plain opened before them, and the newcomers stopped dead, their reactions mirroring the same awe that Nino's party had felt on their first visit. Leona raised her hands and channeled her magic, a glowing orb forming between her palms before erupting into a whirlwind that spiraled upward, testing her power in the open air, feeling the scale of what was possible in this place. The group stared out across the untamed terrain, wild grassland, rocky outcrops, distant mountains beneath the sun rock's eternal glow. Someone raised the obvious challenge. Turning this wilderness into farmland would be an enormous undertaking. The land was fertile, but it was raw, uncleared, and vast beyond anything a small village could tackle quickly. Nino pointed toward the open plain and told them this was exactly what they were here for. The land was waiting. The tools would come from the dungeon, the labor would come from the village, and piece by piece, field by field, they would turn this hidden underground world into a home that could sustain everyone when the surface could not. The group looked at the expanse before them. The scale was daunting, the work ahead immense, but nobody argued. They had seen too much proof to doubt him now. The group stood at the cliff's edge, taking in the scale of the task, when the ground beneath them trembled. Something massive was moving underground. Before anyone could react, a colossal creature erupted from the earth, a giant earthworm, its segmented body tearing through the soil and sending dirt flying in every direction. The newcomers stumbled backward in shock. One of them yelped that it was a heartstopper. Another went pale, frozen mid-step, unable to process the sheer size of the thing barreling through the field below. Then they looked at the aftermath. The land the worm had just torn through wasn't destroyed, it was plowed. Deep, even furrows cut across the terrain in neat rows. The soil turned and loosened as cleanly as if a team of farmers had spent a week working it by hand. Someone stammered that the field was already totally plowed. Nino introduced the creature calmly. This wasn't Mikun, this was Mizu-san, a second tamed giant earthworm, a different individual that Paula had brought under her subordination. Mizu-san was doing exactly what Mikun had done for the village well, except here, the job was agricultural. The newcomers stared at the worm with a mixture of terror and grudging respect. Someone remarked again that the thing was a heartstopper. Paula stood beside Mizu-san with quiet pride, unfazed by the panic. With the land plowed, Nino moved to the next phase. He pulled out a set of pouches and warned the group not to mix them up. The contents of each bag were different and needed to be distributed evenly. One of the recruits took a pouch and recoiled with a startled yelp, unable to tell the bags apart by sight. Nino instructed everyone to bury the contents evenly across the freshly turned soil. These were special transmuted items, he told them, and they were the key to making this farmland productive. Mia took one of the pouches and brought it to her nose. She sniffed. Her expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion. She muttered that the smell was familiar, uncomfortably familiar. Someone asked her what was wrong. Mia's eyes narrowed as the memory connected. She identified it instantly. Bat guano, the same bat guano from the second floor that Nino had made everyone collect while they gagged and protested. Someone praised her nose, sharp as ever. The group stared at the pouches with new understanding. Nino confirmed it. He had taken the bat dung stones, the rare material with a higher rarity rating than the boss slime's hide, and transmuted them with various other ingredients to create a powerful fertilizer. The bat guano's unique properties, combined through alchemy, produced something that could accelerate plant growth far beyond what natural soil could achieve on its own. He admitted he hadn't been entirely sure of the effects when he first collected the stones, but the transmutation had exceeded his expectations. They buried the fertilizer across the plowed field, working the treated material into the soil by hand. Once the ground was prepared, Nino moved to the final step. He produced seeds, labyrinth garlic, a dungeon native crop that thrived underground. It was edible, drought-resistant, and perfectly suited for cultivation in the fifth floor's conditions. Someone in the group remarked that the choice made sense. A plant that had evolved to grow in a labyrinth would handle anything this environment threw at it. Nino planted the first seeds and told the group he would bring more villagers down to work the land in shifts. The field was just the beginning. With enough hands and enough time, the entire plain could be cultivated. Weeks passed. The group returned to the fifth floor and stopped at the edge of the field. What had been raw, freshly plowed dirt was now a lush, vibrant stretch of green. The labyrinth garlic had exploded into growth, thick, healthy stalks rising from the soil in dense rows. The field transformed into something that looked like it had been cultivated for months rather than weeks. The reactions were immediate. Someone whispered in disbelief. Another shouted with excitement. The sheer speed of the transformation stunned everyone who saw it. Nino explained with quiet pride that it was the power of the bat guano fertilizer. The transmuted compound had supercharged the soil, accelerating the growth cycle to a degree that conventional farming couldn't touch. The villagers working the field looked at the harvest and then at Nino with expressions that bordered on reverence. His alchemy hadn't just provided water and monster meat, it had turned an underground wasteland into productive farmland in a matter of weeks. Someone marveled at the possibilities of transmutation for agriculture, voicing what everyone was thinking. If Nino could do this with bat droppings and garlic seeds, what else could he achieve? The filthy poop stones that had disgusted everyone on the second floor had become the foundation of the village's food supply. Every reluctant bag of guano they had collected, every grimace and complaint had led directly to this moment, a thriving field beneath a stone sun, proof that nothing Nino touched was ever wasted. The success of the garlic field ignited something in the village. The farmers gathered around the harvest, voices overlapping with plans and ambitions that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Someone proposed growing wheat on the next cleared plot. Another suggested expanding the fields further along the plain. A third raised the idea of livestock, grazing animals on the open grassland, building pens, establishing a proper food chain. Talk of finding additional water sources and constructing irrigation systems filled the air. The fifth floor, which had been an empty wilderness when they first arrived, was being reimagined as an entire agricultural district. Nino stood apart from the crowd and listened. A quiet determination settled over him as he watched the villagers plan their future underground. This was exactly what he had envisioned, the labyrinth transforming from a dungeon into a living, breathing settlement. Every field planted, every meal cooked, every villager brought down to work, moved them further from the surface's inevitable destruction and closer to survival. He was making his vision real, one step at a time. Then something flickered at the edge of his awareness. The happiness meter, the ornate balance scale from Drakuro Tsuku that only he could see, shifted. The scale tipped, not upward, but toward the wrong side. The bad end indicator crept closer. The balance that had been steadily improving, now threatened by something new. Nino's expression hardened. Something was wrong. He scanned the horizon of the fifth floor, searching for whatever had triggered the shift. The others noticed his change in posture. Someone asked what he was looking at, confusion crossing their face. Then they all saw it. Dark shapes on the horizon, moving fast. A pack of massive birds, tall, muscular, flightless predators built for speed and violence, was closing in on the farmland from across the plain. Assault birds. Nino identified them immediately and felt his stomach drop. He shouted a warning to the group, his voice cutting through the agricultural chatter with an urgency that silenced everyone. These creatures had a petrifying gaze. When their eyes shifted color, turning a deep, angry red, anyone who looked directly at them would be hit with a stone curse. He told the group in no uncertain terms, do not look at their eyes when they turn red. One wrong glance, and they would be paralyzed, helpless, turned to stone, while the birds tore through everything the village had built. The party snapped into combat mode. Nino assessed the situation and called out the strategy. The assault birds had low magic defense. That was their weakness. Mages would take the front line, hitting them with ranged attacks before the birds could close the distance. Fighters would hold the backup position, ready to intercept anything that broke through. Mia stepped forward, fire already gathering at her fingertips. She launched fire bullets at the leading birds, the projectiles slamming into the pack with explosive force. Paula unleashed her beasts, her familiars surging forward to engage the flock head-on. The new recruits fell into position beside them, Leona channeling wind magic from behind, Johann and Simon bracing with weapons drawn. The mages fired in coordinated volleys, while the fighters anchored the line. The battle erupted across the farmland, the assault birds screeching and charging in waves. But the party held. The strategy worked. The birds' low magic resistance meant every spell that connected hit hard, and Mia's fire tore through their ranks. Nino fought alongside them, and between engagements, he crouched over fallen birds and transmuted the cores from their bodies, extracting materials even in the middle of combat. He couldn't afford to waste anything, not even mid-battle. The pack was being pushed back. Nino called out with growing confidence that they were winning. The birds were retreating. The line was holding. The fields were safe. For a moment, it looked like they had weathered the storm. Then the ground shook. A shape appeared behind the retreating flock, something far larger than any of the assault birds they had been fighting. A single bird, towering above the rest, its feathers dark and bristling, its beak curved like a war axe. The greedy terror, Beak, a unique monster, the boss of the pack, and it moved with a predatory intelligence that the smaller birds lacked. It stepped through its retreating subordinates and fixed its gaze on the party with eyes that burned with a deeper, more dangerous light. Mia didn't hesitate. She launched her strongest fire bullet directly at the creature's chest. The spell hit and did nothing. The flames splashed across the terror beak's body and dissipated like sparks against wet stone. Mia's face drained of color. She cried out that her attacks weren't working, that the thing was immune to everything she had. The boss bird let out a sound, not a screech, but a low, resonant boom that vibrated through the ground and silenced every other noise on the 5th floor. It took a step forward, and the farmland trembled beneath its weight. Nino stared up at the greedy terror beak and felt the blood leave his face. The creature was massive, far larger than any monster they had faced in the entire dungeon, its body a wall of dark feathers and corded muscle, its beak heavy enough to split stone. He asked himself the question that was tearing through everyone's mind. Could they even take this thing down? Someone behind him voiced it aloud, confirming with grim certainty that this was the boss of the birds. The pack hadn't been the real threat. They had been the appetizer. This was the predator that commanded them all. Then, Nino saw the eyes. The terror beak's gaze was already shifting, swirling, deepening, cracks of red light spreading through its irises like fractures in glass. The petrifying gaze was activating, not slowly, not as a warning. It was already turning red. Nino's chest tightened as the realization hit. Anyone who met those eyes now would be turned to stone where they stood. "Don't look!" he shouted, his voice ripping across the battlefield. "If you meet its gaze now, it's dangerous." Mia flinched and threw her hands over her eyes, crying out in shock at the sight of the creature bearing down on them. The others scrambled to avert their gazes, turning their backs, shielding their faces. But the terror beak wasn't waiting for them to regroup. It advanced, each step shaking the earth, its red eyes sweeping the field for a target. Nino's mind split in 2 directions at once. The lightning staff, he still had it. One full power discharge might be enough to bring the creature down, the way it had destroyed the boss slime. But he was also mid-transmutation, working on something he had started extracting from the fallen assault bird cores. If he stopped now, the materials would be lost. If he used the staff, he would drain every drop of magic he had left. The decision tore at him, precious seconds burning away while the terror beak closed the distance. Then it turned toward Paula. The massive bird lunged, its beak driving forward like a battering ram, its red eyes locked on the demon woman who stood between it and the farmland. Nino didn't think. He moved. His body launched forward before his mind finished the calculation, legs pumping, arms reaching. "Paula!" He slammed into her at full sprint, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her out of the bird's path. The terror beak's beak crashed into the ground where she had been standing, the impact cratering the soil and sending dirt spraying in every direction. They tumbled together across the field, rolling to a stop in a tangle of limbs and dust. Nino held her, breathing hard, his heart hammering. He asked if she was all right. Paula looked up at him, her composure cracked, but her body unharmed. She told him yes. The word came out quiet, steady, carrying more gratitude than any longer sentence could have. 1 second of relief. That was all they got. Nino lifted his head, and the terror beak was right there, towering directly above him, close enough to touch, its massive body blotting out the sunrock's light. Its eyes burned red, swirling with the petrifying curse, and they were staring straight into his. A crack split the air, not sound. Something deeper, something that ran through Nino's body like lightning through water. He felt it in his bones, in his blood, in the core of his being. The petrification had found him. His eyes were locked with the creature's, and he couldn't look away. "Oh no!" The words barely left his lips before everything changed. Energy erupted from Nino's body. Not the petrification he expected, but something else entirely. Light surged outward from his chest in a cascade of color. Particles of raw magic lifting from his skin and floating into the air around him. The ground beneath him cracked and buckled. The air itself seemed to vibrate, charged with a power that had no name and no precedent. 6 colors of magic, the same rainbow that had astonished Paula during the egg hatching, the same impossible spectrum that a generic human should never have been able to produce, blazed outward in every direction, brighter and more violent than anything he had ever channeled. The terror beak recoiled. The assault birds scattered. Paula, still on the ground beside him, stared with wide eyes, her lips parted in silent shock. Mia lowered her hands from her face and froze. Yoru and Ku went still. The villagers, the recruits, everyone on the 5th floor, they all turned toward the light and saw Nino at its center, suspended in a storm of magic that poured from his body like something ancient being unlocked. He didn't understand what was happening. Nobody did. The petrifying gaze should have turned him to stone. Instead, something inside him had answered the curse with a force that dwarfed it, something that had been sleeping in his body since the day he was reborn in this world, waiting for the moment it was needed most. The light intensified. The colors deepened. Objects lifted from the ground around him, stones, dirt, fragments of transmuted material, all caught in the gravitational pull of whatever was erupting from within. Nino's eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the battlefield anymore. They were seeing something else, something vast, something connected to the dungeon, to the game, to the world itself. The terror beak stood frozen, not in stone, in fear, and then the light consumed everything. The field, the mountains, the sun rock's glow, swallowing the entire 5th floor in a brilliance so total that for one breathless moment, nothing existed except the power radiating from a single transmutation artisan who had come to this world with nothing but a dead man's memories and a promise to save everyone he loved. When the light faded, the story did not continue, not yet. The 5th floor hung in silence. The terror beak had not moved. Nino had not fallen. The field still stood. Paula still breathed. And somewhere far above them, on the surface of a dying world, the crack in the moon widened by another fraction. The dragon of destruction's eye opening just a little more, indifferent to the miracle unfolding in the depths below. 3 years remained. The village was alive. The dungeon was theirs. And whatever had just awakened inside Nino, whatever ancient, impossible force had answered the monster's curse with light instead of stone, it was only the beginning.